Chapter 81. After seeing Jack nodded with a smile, Wyrm began the ritual. He closed his eyes, and the glowing hand that touched Jack's hair shone brightly, instantly drowning the surroundings, making Jean and Atlanta unable to open their eyes. At that moment, Wyrm and Jack were in a sealed space. Wyrm looked at Jack, who had her eyes closed, and then looked around. In addition to Wyrm and Jack, there was a lot of black smoke in that space. The black smoke exuded an unusual aura. Is this Jack the Ripper's curse? Wyrm looked at the black smoke and frowned. Jack, who had her eyes closed, opened her eyes, and saw Wyrm and Jack the Ripper's curse that had been entangling them. Jack looked a little panicked at the moment. Although those curses had been with them for almost 200 years, they were still afraid when they saw those curses at the moment. Wyrm stepped forward and hugged Jack, saying softly, "It's okay, Jack, I'm here." Jack didn't know why, but after hearing Wyrm and the others' words, she calmed down and felt that those curses were not so terrible. Because of resentment, you became a collection of resentment, but because you were absorbed by Jack the Ripper's curse, you had to become Jack the Ripper, unable to reincarnate, and have been cursed. Jack looked at Wyrm in confusion, not knowing what Wyrm meant. Wyrm touched Jack in the other's little head and continued, "So if someone takes your place to bear Jack the Ripper's curse, doesn't that mean you're liberated?" Jack stared at Wyrm in disbelief. They already understood what Wyrm meant. "But in that case, big brother, I will become Jack the Ripper, right?" Wyrm smiled. "Don't worry, I'm the demonic dragon. I won't even blink an eye for a curse of more than 200 years. Wyrm's plan was to absorb Jack's curse into his body by communicating with Jack's soul. In that way, they would just be resentful spirits. Finally, with Joan of Arc's prayer, he could purify the resentful spirits and let them enter heaven or reincarnate. "Then I'll start little Jack." Wyrm closed his eyes, and his body emitted a faint light. The surrounding black smoke began to struggle to be absorbed by Wyrm's body. Wyrm vaguely seemed to hear someone struggling. "That's Jack the Ripper," Wyrm thought. Soon, at a speed visible to the naked eye, the black fog was completely absorbed by Wyrm. Now the entire space was no longer shrouded by the black fog, and it was no longer so eerie and terrifying. However, because of the resentful spirits, there was a trace of coldness here. "Okay, now you're no longer Jack." Wyrm took a deep breath and said to the souls in front of him, Are we really saved?" She shed tears and looked at Wyrm in disbelief. I promise." She hugged Wyrm excitedly and cried, Thank you, thank you, thank you." They just kept thanking him, and this was the only way to express their feelings. "Then let's go out." "Okay." Outside, when the star-like light emitted by Wyrm no longer flickered, Joan of Arc and Atlanta opened their eyes. At this moment, they found that they were no longer in the inherent enchantment, but returned to Tulifas. Sieg and Astolfo, who were also swept into the inherent enchantment before, also appeared on the street not far away. As for the dense fog, it had also disappeared. After reacting, both Joan of Arc and Atlanta looked at the place where Wyrm and Jack were before. They found that there was only a child with an illusory body beside Wyrm at this moment, and Jack's servant reaction had disappeared. "I've rescued Jack from Jack the Ripper's curse. Now she's no longer Jack. She's just a collection of vengeful spirits," Wyrm explained to them. Then Wyrm looked at Joan of Arc and said, "Jean, pray for them." At this moment, Joan of Arc was also relieved. After all, if it was just a resentful spirit, as long as it was purified, it could be reincarnated like an ordinary soul. Wyrm looked at Atlanta, who was at a loss, and then looked at the liberated Jack, and said, "What do you want to do?" "Jack, that's not Jack." Jack, who was no longer Jack, went directly to Atlanta. "Hey, Sister Atlanta, thank you for protecting us until the end. We are leaving now to start our new life. Goodbye." Atlanta looked at the child who said so and shed tears. The black fog on her right hand also disappeared at this moment. Atlanta wiped her tears and said to Jack with a smile, "I'll go, I wish you happiness." Then, under Joan of Arc's prayer, Jack turned into a little starlight and disappeared. Before disappearing, Wyrm vaguely heard, "Thank you, big brother. Goodbye, Jack." Then Wyrm shook his head again. Obviously, Jack was no longer Jack, and he was Jack. Then Wuming looked at Atlanta. So, do you have anything to say, Atlanta? Atlanta seemed to have turned back into the famous huntress because some of the curses around her body had disappeared. I have nothing to say. Thank you, Sodric. Atlanta looked at Wuming, her eyes full of gratitude. Atlanta looked at Joan of Arc again. I will beat you down and make you agree with my idea of all children can be saved, ruler. Atlanta was like a hero, challenging another hero. Joan of Arc smiled bitterly. Ah. With a roar, Frankenstein fell from the sky and hammered at Atlanta with a giant hammer. Atlanta dodged nimbly, then looked at Wuming again with gratitude, jumped on the roof, and left. Are you okay? I couldn't find you just now. After a while, the thick fog suddenly disappeared. Berserker, who was sent by His Highness Cowles to look for you, saw the red archer and thought you were attacked, so he rushed up directly. Karen said through telepathy. It's okay. The black assassin has been dealt with. Let's talk about what happened later, Wuming replied. Then Wuming and Joan of Arc, as well as Astolfo, who was supporting Sieg, and Frankenstein, who came to support, returned to Mylnia Citadel. Tulifas returned to its peaceful state. None of the residents here knew that the man-killer fiend incident had been dealt with while they were asleep. Chapter 82. The next day, noon, Myrenia Citadel, conference room. Because they dealt with Jack the Ripper at night, it was almost midnight by the time everything was settled. Therefore, they decided to schedule the meeting at noon. Fiore sat at the head of the table and looked at the people sitting on both sides. Wuming, Jean, Sieg, Astolfo, Collins, Sharon, Gold, Liongielli, and Mordred. Because they were going to discuss the final strategy for the Sky Garden, Liongielli and Mordred arrived very early. Because Frankenstein was still a berserker, he didn't participate in this meeting. Black Assassin, Jack the Ripper's matter is finally settled. I would like to thank Miss Jean and Mr. Sodlek. Because she couldn't move, Fiore only slightly lowered her head to express her gratitude. This is also my responsibility as the ruler, Jean shook her head and said, indicating that Fiore didn't need to thank her anymore. As the offender, I only listened to the words of the ruler. No need to thank me, Wuming smiled. Speaking of which, are you ready to attack the Sky Garden? Jean asked. Yes, we have prepared many planes. When the time comes, we can directly fly to the Sky Garden. Just then, Astolfo stood up and raised his hand. I said I know how to fly a plane. Let me fly it. Seeing Astolfo's excited face, Wuming smiled helplessly. We need more than one plane. It is really inconvenient for you to fly it. The planes are all for magic puppets to fly, Collins interrupted. Astolfo sat down with a depressed face. Although we have prepared many planes, we still lack a trump card. After all, the Sky Garden has automatic magic cannons comparable to the EX level. Therefore, for the current situation, we are still at a disadvantage. Just then, Wuming raised his hand. I have a way to directly enter the Sky Garden. But I need to know what the inside of the Sky Garden looks like. Wuming's method was Portal Scroll. Currently, Wuming was a saber, so he couldn't use Portal Scroll. However, if it was a scroll, after knowing the location, he could open the portal in 3 or 4 days. Then, Wuming opened Dragonist and took out a golden scroll. Putting it in the center of the table, Wuming began to explain. This is a high-level magic scroll called Portal. It can connect any 2 known locations to teleport magic, provided that you have the images of the 2 locations in your mind. Then Wuming looked at Sharon and said, Sharon, if you have been to the Sky Garden and are the teacher of the great heroes of Greek mythology, you should be able to use this scroll, right? Everyone looked at Sharon. Sharon picked up the scroll and carefully observed it for a while, then said, This is a kind of magic scroll similar to Norse mythology. I think I should be able to use it, but I still have to prepare in advance. After all, this is a magic scroll comparable to magic. What? Everyone was shocked, especially Fiore, Cowles, and Golder, who were humans. You said this is a magic scroll comparable to magic. Gold swallowed. After all, magic in this world was different from magic. Magic was the general term for the act of artificially recreating mysteries and miracles. Even if it was an incredible and mysterious phenomenon, As long as it was caused by nature, it was not magic. In short, it was man-made and natural factors. And magicians had an iron rule: they couldn't show mysteries to the world. When a magician performed magic, if ordinary people saw it, they must forget it, or let them think that it was done with technology. Anyway, they could either kill the ordinary person, or make them lose their memory. They must not let ordinary people know the existence of magic. As for why, it was because of mystery. A long time ago, when civilization was not civilized, basically all magic was called magic. And people who used magic were called magicians. Now, as more and more people knew about magic, magic was slowly reduced to magic. Hiding was the essence of magic. The more people knew and used it, the power of magic would be scattered and weakened. Because magic was the use of power that had been determined in the root, the more people knew, the weaker its power would be. Just like 10 portions of power being used by one person was the same as being used by 10 people. The fewer people knew, the fewer people would use it. That was why magicians tried to avoid magic from being discovered by ordinary people. And there was a clear difference between magic and magic. Magic could be achieved by modern technology, but magic could not be achieved by modern technology. No matter how long it took, no matter how much money it took, as long as it was achieved by modern means, it was magic. For example, fireball could be achieved by modern technology, and fireball was magic. For example, time travel could not be achieved by modern technology, and time travel was magic. Of course, the magic Silent learned in Nazarik's underground tomb, and the magic of the moon world were two different things. They were not the same thing. Yes, I got this scroll when I became a dragon and traveled to other worlds, so judging by the level, it's almost comparable to an A-level noble phantasm. Because of my current rank, I can't use it normally. After all, teleportation gate was already a very advanced teleportation skill in Yggdrasil. It ignored the distance. As long as the scene in a certain place, it could connect 2 teleportation gates. There was no limit to the number of teleportation gates, and there was no time limit to the activation of the teleportation gate. It could only be used after reaching a certain level. Then, that's all for the meeting. We just need to wait for Archer to prepare the activation scroll. Fiol said and sighed with relief. That's it. Let's prepare for the battle in a few days. Wyrm stood up and said. In the corridor, Wyrm and Joan of Arc walked side by side. No one spoke. They all wanted to quietly enjoy this temporary encounter. After all, Wyrm aside, Joan of Arc will return to her Hall of Valhalla after the Holy Grail War. Hey Sodric. You must win the battle in a few days. Yeah. It was just a few short sentences, but the feelings contained within them were boundless. While the two were enjoying this brief moment, Mordred caught up from behind. Hey, Villa, let's go eat. Huh. Wyrm made a strange sound. Why do you suddenly want to eat with me? Wyrm looked at Mordred and asked in confusion. It's not because Master said he wanted to go back to the tomb to prepare. I don't want to go back, and I haven't had a big meal in this city yet. Let's go. After saying that, Mordred used her slender arms to wrap around Wyrm's neck, wanting to take large strides forward. Wyrm looked back at Joan of Arc helplessly and apologized with his eyes. Joan of Arc was taken aback, but after she reacted, she said softly, Sodric, enjoy your meal. Then Joan of Arc turned around and left. Chapter 83. Mordred dragged Wyrm to a restaurant that Mordred said was delicious. Then, under the usual gaze of the restaurant owner, he served Mordred a dozen dishes. Wyrm, on the other hand, ordered a few dishes symbolically, and then looked at Mordred, who began to gorge herself, and could not help but mutter softly. Could it be that the Pendragon family are all big eaters? King Yusef is the same. He usually eats a lot, but Leah eats even more. Now Mordred is eating so much. I'm starting to wonder if the Pendragon family has 2 stomachs. Mordred, who was happily eating, glanced at Wyrm, tilted her head and said, Did you say anything? No, why would I? Hurry up and eat. It won't taste good when it's cold. With that, Wyrm also picked up the cutlery and began a war of tongues. By the way, this tastes good. Wyrm's mouth moved as he said. Right. The food in this restaurant is superb. Ah. With that, Mordred took another bite. Yes, yes. Wuming looked at Mordred somewhat dotingly. Logically speaking, Mordred is also my daughter. Because Morgan Le Fay wanted to create an invincible weapon to help her seize the throne of King Arthur, Morgan Le Fay also collected Wuming's bloodline, and mixed her bloodline with Artoria's and Wuming's bloodline to finally create Mordred. Because Wuming's root dragon bloodline was too powerful, the Wuming bloodline in Mordred's body was very thin. Although the root dragon bloodline in Mordred's body was thin, she was still Wuming's daughter. As mentioned before, Mordred was not liked by the others in the Knights of the Round Table. Only Wuming approached Mordred with the intention of avoiding the tragedy of King Arthur's son destroying Arthur's dynasty. After all, Wuming knew the legend of King Arthur. But as the days passed, Wuming found that Mordred's personality was too simple, like a child who had just been born for a few years. Moreover, Mordred had a great admiration for King Arthur. In addition, Wuming's previous encounters with Skaha, Maeve and Cuchulainn did not match the characters he knew. Wuming's understanding of Skaha was that he was a cold and indifferent godslayer, who could not abandon talented people. But Wuming's master was like a big sister next door. Of course, that was her state outside of training and battle. As for Maeve, legend had it that she was a wanton young woman, an arrogant and intelligent woman. But Wuming's Maeve was somewhat arrogant, but her character was not wanton. Then there was Cuchulainn. Legend had it that Cuchulainn was a warrior with a fiery temper, and was extremely cruel. He often violated the agreement, and killed several people in sneak attacks. Wuming's Cuchulainn was a pure warrior and was not cruel. As for violating the agreement and killing people by sneak attacks, Wuming felt that it was even more ridiculous. Wuming's Cuchulainn was not that kind of person. This led Wuming to seriously suspect that the legends of this world were seriously inconsistent with the legends he knew. So Wuming no longer used the characters he knew. Wuming began to treat them as unknown people. In the subsequent contact with Mordred, Mordred seemed to have discovered that she had a connection with them, so she often avoided Wuming. This led to the relationship between the two of them being good and bad. When they were bad, they would speak ill of each other and fight with each other. When they were good, they would play together and eat together. Although Mordred also wore a helmet when eating, which was worth complaining about. Wuming shook his head and looked back at Mordred, who was happily eating, and smiled. What's wrong? Why are you suddenly smiling? Mordred looked at Wuming, who was smiling. Wuming picked up a fork and took a bite of the beef. Enjoying the juicy beef, he replied absent-mindedly. Nothing, I just thought of something happy. That's strange. Mordred did not look at Wuming and resumed her hunt for food. At this time, the door of the shop was opened and a pair of figures walked in. Mr. Sodric and Red Saber. Wuming and Mordred looked at the door, and saw Sigastolfo standing there looking at them. Mordred said unhappily, "What's the meaning of an Red Saber? I feel like I'm hooked up with him. Damn it." Despite Mordred's words, she did not get angry and continued eating. Sigastolfo, on the other hand, stood there and smiled awkwardly. Wuming immediately said, "Since you're here, let's have a meal together." After a while, the shop owner served the dishes that Sig and Astolfo ordered. However, Sig and Astolfo did not eat and seemed to have something to say. "What is it? Just say it." Sig hesitated for a while and looked at Wuming. "Mr. Sodric, do you think there is a correct existence in human history?" Wuming put down his utensils and wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Is it about Jack the Ripper?" "Yes. Although it's not all of human history, but..." Sig seemed to recall the scenes that he saw in Jack the Ripper's relic, the Dark Mist City. He did not say anything else. "So Mordred, what do you think about this?" Wuming did not answer Sig directly. Instead, he asked Mordred. "Huh? Why are you asking me all of a sudden?" Mordred raised her eyebrows and looked at Wuming. Mordred said as she chewed on the food in her mouth, "Humans are humans. They can be good or evil depending on the situation. At the end of the day, they are just a group of slightly smarter beasts." Then, she picked up a piece of pastry with a fork and put it into her mouth. They will only act under the influence of their own selfish desires. They will forget the kindness they received, but they will never forget their hatred. The value of protecting them is not even worth a copper coin. Mordred did not care about Sieg's eyes that were getting more and more confused. That's not it. Humans are more interesting this way. That's why Astolfo refuted. However, Mordred did not care and interrupted him. What about you? What do you think? Sieg thought for a moment and said, I think I like humans, at least before I knew about assassin. What about now? I don't know. I always thought that protecting was the right thing to do, but now whether this choice is the right one, I don't know. Looking at Sieg, who lowered his head, Wyrm smiled. Then I'll congratulate you first, Sieg. Sieg and Astolfo looked at Wyrm in confusion. Because you have the right idea, Sieg. Wyrm looked at Mordred. His gaze made Mordred uncomfortable. Then he looked at Sieg. Let's not talk about whether what you are protecting is the right thing to do. At least you have the right approach. Regardless of the outcome, at least your starting point is good. Wyrm took a sip of water and continued. For an android like you who has just been born, this is already a very good thing. Then Wyrm looked at Mordred, who had finished his meal, and signaled with his eyes. Mordred understood. He stood up and walked to the door. Wyrm also stood up. They were about to leave. You still have a lot to learn, Sieg. At least I can tell you that there is nothing wrong with protecting humans, but you have to distinguish between those who are worth protecting and those who are not. Mordred walked out of the restaurant, and Wyrm followed closely behind. Wyrm also left a sentence for Sieg. Only by protecting what is worth protecting can you live up to that heart of yours. At this moment, Sieg seemed to understand something, but also seemed to not understand something. In short, he no longer felt as tired as before. Oh yeah, help me pay the bill. Wyrm's voice came after he walked away. Then Sieg and Astolfo fell to the ground and could not get up again. Chapter 84. 3 days later, in the evening, Blackcaster's abandoned workshop. Everyone gathered there. Sharon was one step away from successfully implementing the portal scroll. As long as he injected magical power into it, he could open the portal. Because the portal scroll could instantly open a portal somewhere, Semiramis, who controlled the Sky Garden, would not notice anything unusual in advance. In those 3 days, the androids' bodies were abnormal, and Golder took the initiative to treat the androids. Sieg solved the heart demon, and helped to treat the androids with Astolfo. Fiore transferred the magic seal to her brother Collins, during which Sharon needed to perform the ritual. Wyrm had to temporarily replace Karen's control of the portal scroll. After that, Wyrm accompanied Jean on a date and enjoyed the last time. During that time, they met Collins, who had been chatting with Frankenstein in the flowers. In short, everyone was very busy these days. Now everyone began to attack the Sky Garden. Let's start, Archer, Fiore said. Yes. After that, Sharon injected a trace of magical power into the scroll, and a black and red hole appeared. Let's go, everyone, we must stop Shiro Amakusa, Jean said, wearing a blue armor, holding the holy flag in her hand. Yes. Everyone responded in unison. Jean, Wyrm, Sharon, Astolfo, Frankenstein, Sieg, and Collins walked into the portal, and then the portal was closed. That was to prevent the enemy from attacking Fiore through the portal. Because Fiore's legs were inconvenient, and she had removed the magic seal, she was weak, so she was not allowed to fight in the final battle. There was also Golder because his servant Siegfried had disappeared, so even if he went he would not be able to do anything, so he stayed. Fiore looked at the disappearing portal, clenched her fists and prayed. The Sky Garden. A black and red oval-shaped hole about the height of a person suddenly appeared in the deepest part of the abyss, where Sharon had once been. Semiramis, who was sitting high on the throne, instantly sensed that someone used space magic to invade the Sky Garden. The Master is still inside the Great Holy Grail, so let us, the servants, hold him back for a while. With that, a few figures appeared under Semiramis's throne. Red Lancer Karna, Red Archer Atlanta, Red Rider Achilles, Red Caster Shakespeare, including the Red Assassin Semiramis, who was sitting on the throne. All of the Red Team's servants were present. Of course, there was also the traitorous Red Saber Mordred and another Red Saber, Sodlek. Although Red Berserker Spartacus is dead, and Red Saber Mordred has betrayed us, and we are short of 2 servants. The enemy is in a worse state than us. I hope you won't disappoint me, heroes, Semiramis whispered in a strange tone. No, no, no. I won't go to the battlefield, Empress of Assyria, read Castor Shakespeare said exaggeratedly. Then go and protect the great Holy Grail, Castor. Semiramis seemed to have no way to deal with Castor, who was like a psychopath, and directly ordered him to defend the rear. So let's begin the final battle of the Holy Grail War. On the other side, after Wyrm and others came out of the portal, they immediately closed the portal. After that, except for Joan of Arc, everyone else was teleported away by the space magic of the Sky Garden. Joan of Arc looked around vigilantly, and then she had no choice but to move on. After all, time waits for no one, and she didn't have to worry about the comfort of others. They were all heroes. Somewhere in the Sky Garden, Achilles, who had green hair and a crossbow, was waiting quietly with his eyes closed. Suddenly, a brown-haired young man with a ponytail appeared. Sharon looked at Achilles, then looked around and said, "So it's space magic." "Yes, and it's the best place for you and me to fight." Achilles opened his eyes and said. The relatively empty space was suitable for Sharon, who was the archer, and Achilles, who was the rider, to fight. On the other side of the Sky Garden, Collins, Frankenstein, Sieg, and Astolfo looked at the strange ancient Babylonian street in confusion. All of a sudden, an arrow flew towards them. Boom! Aha! Frankenstein knocked away the arrow with his hammer and roared. "Red Archer!" Collins panicked. "Rider!" Sieg shouted. "Roger!" Hippogriff, the illusory horse of the world. Astolfo summoned the eagle and flew with Sieg and Cowls. Berserker is responsible for the main attack. Red Archer. Rider is responsible for the feint attack. Is that okay? Collins, Sieg, and Astolfo discussed. Well, no problem. Atlanta, who was in a hidden house, looked at Astolfo, who was in the air, and Frankenstein, who was rushing toward them, and she couldn't help but frown. Really, they said, one-on-one. Need to contain the opponent's trump card, and each of them has to deal with 1 servant, but they actually want me to deal with 2 servants. Atlanta drew her bow again, but this time it was 2 arrows. Then, I will let you fall here. I present you with this calamity. Foibos catchy, petition of the arrow. Between the thrones of Semiramis, Mordred looked at the door and couldn't help but laugh. It seems that we have drawn the trump card, master. But Jelly shook his head helplessly and said, "If possible, I really don't want to draw the trump card." Although he said that, Jelly took the lead and said, "Let's go, Saber, let them see the power of the Knights of the Round Table." "Ah, no problem, master." In a virtual space, Wyrm appeared here. Looking at the dim space around him, Wyrm frowned. It seems that the opponent has a powerful noble phantasm, otherwise, I won't be transferred here. Following a series of footsteps, a fair-skinned man wearing golden armor and golden earrings walked over. He was holding a divine spear that was as bright as the sun. "So my opponent is you," Karna said. "No wonder there is this space. If it is in the Sky Garden, it is afraid that you will break it, Karna," Wyrm said. "Although I've appeared in this world as Sodric, I've basically inherited all of Vero's treasures. For the time being, I should be able to put up a fight." Wyrm condensed his armor and took out his meteor silver. Then, Wyrm looked at Karna. "So let's begin, hero of charity." And Joan of Arc, under the guidance of the revelation, came to the great Holy Grail. "Oh, welcome, Joan of Arc." Joan of Arc looked at Castor in front of her, frowned and said, "Please get out of the way, Castor Shakespeare, you can't beat me." "Oh, do you think so?" Shakespeare showed a mysterious smile. "Although I can't beat you, but let's begin. First folio, the time for the show to begin is here. There should be thunderous cheers." Chapter 85. Achilles and Sharon stood facing each other. Achilles explained to Achilles the reason why he had helped Shiro Amakusa Shurjin. The third magic, Heaven's Feel. So that's how it is. With the power of the great Holy Grail, it is indeed possible to materialize the soul and save the human race. Sharon was not pretentious and evaluated the idea from a third person's point of view. "That's right. As a warrior, don't you think this is a dream worth gambling on, Sharon? Sharon. Achilles asked. Why? Why did you choose such a superficial path, Achilles? Sharon frowned and looked at Achilles in confusion. Chiron was right. This was indeed a very superficial path. The history of the human race is the history of war. I have lost too many friends, too many people I loved deeply. If I can free people from their fate, this is what a hero should do. Achilles looked straight into Charon's eyes, his expression extremely serious. No. That's just arrogance. You don't want to fight against fate, you want to control it. Sharon retorted. In response, Achilles was somewhat disdainful. Although that's the case, aren't you still obsessed with your lost immortal body? That's right. Even if I become a legend, as a star shining in the sky, it is still the same. Sharon looked thoughtfully at the Sagittarius constellation in the sky. And even though Charon's parents never loved him from the beginning, and his mother even voluntarily became a linden after giving birth to him, he still wanted to take back the proof of his blood relationship with his parents. Is that so? Even if you become a star, you can't get rid of your fate? This is what a hero is. After saying that, Achilles raised his gun and aimed at Sharon. Come on, Black Archer. Ah, Red Rider. Arrows flew, and the tip of the gun surged. The two kept jumping. Sometimes Achilles fought Sharon in close range. Sometimes Sharon opened up a distance and shot at Achilles from afar. But overall, Achilles was at a disadvantage. What's wrong, Achilles? Is this all you can do? As your master, I am very disappointed. Damn it. Achilles dodged an arrow and said angrily. It was normal. After all, Achilles' moves were taught by Sharon. Basically, Sharon could almost predict what Achilles wanted to do as soon as he moved. Moreover, Sharon also had B+ clairvoyance and a mind's eye true. Clairvoyance B+, good vision, capture of distant targets. Dynamic vision increased. At the same time, mind's eye true can also achieve limited vision. Mind's eye true insight cultivated through cultivation and forging. It was a battle theory that allowed one to calmly grasp one's own situation and the enemy's abilities while at a disadvantage and find a way out. With clairvoyance, Achilles' heel. Although it was only for a short moment, it was a blink of an eye could decide the outcome of the battle. As Charon's disciple, Achilles naturally knew of his master's abilities. So, Diatrechon Asterolonk, star of the soaring sky. Achilles instantly threw the spear to Sharon and activated his noble phantasm. The surrounding space froze. Sharon looked at the changes around him and said faintly, So that's your noble phantasm? Yes, this is a one-on-one duel. Unless one side wins, it can't be unlocked. Whether it's time, space, or luck, everything is ineffective here, including immortality and noble phantasm. Only your own power can work here, and if one side loses, the failure will also be transmitted to the other side. Although it's ineffective if the other side doesn't want to fight one-on-one, we are indeed in a one-on-one duel right now, and I believe you won't choose to run away. Sharon replied. So that's how it is. As long as I don't want to run away, this place won't disappear. And if I stay here, my future vision won't work. Then Achilles made a pancreasin pose. Although I didn't want to fight you one-on-one before, it's different now. We have a trump card. Sharon then abandoned the bow in his hand. Since the noble phantasm won't work, I'll use pancreasin too. Sharon and Achilles bumped their fists. I'm Achilles, the son of the hero Peleus. I'm Sharon, the son of the great god Kronos. Then both of them said at the same time, Let's fight! Let's fight! The two of them were on the verge of fighting. On the other side, there were colorful ripples in the sky, and arrows rained down from the sky. The places where the arrows hit were as if there was an explosion, and they kept exploding. Sieg, Astolfo, Frankenstein, and Cowles, who were in the arrow formation, could no longer be seen. However, Atlanta, who had released her noble phantasm, did not relax. In her senses, although the opponent's aura had weakened, it did not disappear. Then streaks of green lightning shot out, destroying the countless arrows that were shot down. Astolfo rode on the eagle and carried Sieg. There were no traces of arrows on their bodies, and even their clothes were not wrinkled at all. Frankenstein, who had rushed forward, appeared next to Cowles. Command incantation? Atlanta said thoughtfully as she looked at Frankenstein, who had disappeared. Frankenstein's body was full of arrows, and his body was broken. Cowles, who was under his protection, was not hurt at all. Berserker. Cowles looked at Frankenstein, who was full of arrows, with an indescribable tone. After seeing the arrows, Cowles immediately used the command incantation to call back Frankenstein, who had rushed over. The Red Archer did not care about Berserker, and deliberately set the range of his noble phantasm to his side. He was indeed a hero who left his name in history. "Okay!" Frankenstein roared angrily, as if he was angry that the opponent had attacked his master, and he was angry that he was hurt. "Wait a minute, Berserker, let me treat your wound first," Cowles said to Frankenstein. At the same time, Cowles said to Astolfo and Sieg, who were flying in the air through spiritual communication, "Please ask Ryder to restrain Archer, or else we won't be able to rush over." "Understood." Astolfo roared and rushed up with Sieg. Atlanta, who was hiding in the shadows, looked at the eagle rushing over from the sky and immediately drew her bow. After drawing the heavenly bow to its fullest, the rank a powerful arrow was shot out. Atlanta's noble phantasm, heavenly bow, could be strengthened to A level after fully drawing the bow. Astolfo knew the power of that arrow, so he did not choose to take it head-on, but chose to dodge. However, when Astolfo dodged, several more arrows were shot at him. While moving, the eagle frantically dodged the arrows. However, there was an arrow hidden behind another arrow. The arrow behind caught up with the arrow in front of it, causing the two arrows to deviate at the same time and shoot towards the eagle that had just dodged. That showed how amazing the archer's archery was. Astolfo knew that he could not avoid the arrow, but he did not panic. When the arrow hit the eagle, along with Astolfo and Sieg on its back, disappeared like a phantom. They reappeared somewhere in front of him. "What? Is this dimensional jump?" At that moment, the eagle had almost rushed to Atlanta, and Astolfo was also happy. "That's right, this is Hippogriff's special ability, dimensional jump. Although it's only for a short time, tonight is indeed a moonless night. Don't underestimate me as one of Charlemagne's 12 warriors." Astolfo had a legend that the moon took away his rationality, so it was not surprising that Astolfo regained his rationality on a moonless night. Astolfo instantly poured his magical power into the eagle's body and activated the eagle's B-level noble phantasm. Although the eagle's level was inferior to the griffin, which was a divine beast, the crushing damage caused by its dash was comparable to a great physical attack. Go, Hippogriff! Chapter 86. In the room where the Assyrian Empress Semiramis was located, Semiramis was waiting for the intruder outside the door while thinking about the other servants' battles. As for the battle between the servants on the other battlefields, they might not have the confidence to win, but the red side servants had a great advantage over the black side servants. Although Karna said that he would not care about the others if he saw the black saber was already dead, so there was no problem. Although Atlanta was weaker than Karna, her opponents were Ryder Astolfo and Berserker Frankenstein. Even if she couldn't win, she could still restrain them. How dare a brat talk back to me? If it was the red saber, he could deal with her. It would be uncomfortable if he didn't see her desperate face. As for Achilles and his master Charon, Achilles promised that he would win, but even if he didn't win, it would be fine. After all, there was still Karna, and the master's words were about to come out. And Shakespeare's noble phantasm was restrained by Joan of Arc, so there was no need to worry at all. So it was about time. Semiramis finished thinking and looked at the door in front of her that opened automatically. A ferocious uncle with sunglasses and a non-mainstream girl walked in. She smiled. "Oh, there's actually someone guarding the house. You're really obedient, assassin." Mordred directly mocked her. Semiramis instantly changed from smiling to gnashing her teeth, but on the surface, she was still polite. "You're a bit arrogant for someone who has never sat on the throne before." "What are you talking about? I'll just kick you down." Hearing Mordred's words, Semiramis couldn't help but smile. Then she smiled and said, "The reason why I use space teleportation to lead you here is that I want to personally teach you how to talk." Semiramis waved her hand, and several pipes stretched out from the surrounding walls, spraying a kind of lavender mist. At this moment, Mordred also noticed that the door was beginning to close. "It's a trap, Master." In an instant, Mordred roared and kicked the lion out of the door that was about to close. And because Mordred didn't use much strength, the lion quickly landed, and then quickly threw a crystal to Mordred, who was still in the room. The door closed. "Damn it. Saber, come to my side." One of the 4 command seals in Lion Jieli's hand disappeared, but the command seal's effect didn't happen. What? The command incantation won't work anymore. I have some understanding of command incantations. Semiramis' voice suddenly sounded. She continued, "Although the time is short, I can also interfere with the master's contract with the servant, including command incantations." Damn it. Jieli the lion could only wait anxiously outside the door. Let's hope that Sodric's item is effective. Inside the door, the space was filled with a faint poisonous fog. Mordred put on his armor, and at the same time, he immediately poured a trace of magic power into the crystal that Lion Jieli threw in. In an instant, the power of the crystal enveloped Mordred, making the poisonous fog around Mordred unable to invade. What? This time it was Semiramis who was shocked. What kind of item is that? It can actually block my poison. Mordred held the crystal that was emitting a faint light and said softly, "You've helped a lot, Villo. I'll treat you to a drink." This item was the one that Wuming gave every participant when he knew Semiramis' real name. At that time Wuming said, "Semiramis is the most ancient poison killer. We are going to enter the poison killer's noble phantasm, so we have to be careful. Especially Sharon, if he falls into her trap he'll be finished. But the rest of you, don't be careless. This crystal is an item that is used to resist poison. Just pour a trace of magic into it, and it can be activated. Carry it with you just in case." Mordred gave the crystal to Jieli. Mordred said that it was too much of a hindrance to carry it, and that it would be used when the time came. Jieli the lion threw the anti-poison crystal into the door before it closed. Wuming also judged the level of the Yggdrasil, world tree, item in the moon-shaped world. World-level items were classified as EX, God-level items were classified as A, legendary-level items were classified as B, holy relic items were classified as C, heritage-level items were classified as D, and the highest-level items were classified as E. What do you think? Vicious woman. What other tricks do you have? Use them all. Mordred opened her helmet and put the crystal into her mouth. The crystal was not very big, and it just happened to fill her mouth. Then Mordred closed her helmet and rushed towards Semiramis. Tisk! Semiramis spat in displeasure. She then activated a magic array around herself. The magic circle shot out countless magic bullets and magic lasers. Mordred dodged the magic lasers and used her sword to disperse the magic bullets. Then, she ran towards Semiramis. Following an even bigger magic circle, a huge beam of light swept towards Mordred, producing a large amount of flames. Mordred rushed out of the flames and shouted, "Is this all you've got?" Semiramis smiled. Then several magic circles appeared, and several chains made of poisonous fog shot towards Mordred. Because she was in the air, Mordred could not dodge and was instantly entangled by the chains. Semiramis controlled the chains to swing Mordred around wantonly. Then she smiled and said, "How does it feel to be a little bug?" Mordred cut off the chains and jumped to the ground. She instantly released her magic and rushed towards Semiramis, who was sitting on the throne, like a red lightning bolt. After dodging all the entangling chains, Mordred soared into the sky and shot towards Semiramis. "Got it!" Mordred shouted. Crash! Accompanied by the sound of rattling chains, Mordred was firmly entangled by several chains. The tip of her sword was still a few centimeters away from Semiramis, but these few centimeters were like a natural moat that couldn't be crossed. "You'd better return to the audience." Semiramis chuckled. A large amount of water burst out from her side and washed Mordred to the ground. A huge green fish that looked like a loach appeared from the water and rushed towards Mordred. As the daughter of the fish god, Semiramis had the ability to summon the divine fish of the gods. It opened its mouth, which was as tall as 2 people, and bit down viciously at Mordred. Mordred blocked its mouth with her sword and gathered red lightning in her other hand. She then shot it out and killed the divine fish. A large number of divine fish appeared from the water and tried to bite Mordred. Mordred held her sword with both hands and gathered her magic on the sword, causing it to emit red lightning. Finally, she released the lightning and killed the divine fish. Mordred had learned her lesson this time. She did not get close to the divine fish and activated her relic. Clarent Blood Arthur. Suddenly, the hall was covered by red lightning. On the other hand, in the battle space that was specially designed for fighting, a flame and a meteor kept colliding in the air. Karna and Wuming were fighting fiercely. The entire space was almost destroyed. There was not a single piece of undamaged ground. Karna sometimes fought Wuming in close combat with his superb martial arts skills. Sometimes he would use his relic to attack Wuming. Brahmastra Brahma cover the earth. On the other hand, Wuming was constantly fighting against Karna, constantly activating his noble artifacts to fight back. Silver. The hot spear tip and the surging sword tip were fighting each other. They were evenly matched. No wonder you're a Villo of the Knights of the Round Table, the strongest knight, Karna said. You flatter me, Karna. But I'm Sodric now, so don't be mistaken. Wuming stood not far from Karna, and said, You can't use all your abilities as a Villo now, right? Karna suddenly asked. Although I can't use all my abilities as a Villo, I can use all my abilities as a warrior. Do you want to try, Karna? The two of them looked at each other with a faint smile on their faces. Then I shall show you my hidden noble artifact, Brahmastra Kundala. Come on, Silver. A flame and a meteor collided. The two energy beams fell into a silent zone. Then, like a nuclear bomb exploding, a huge mushroom cloud burst out from the point of contact between the relic and their weapons. Chapter 87. Wu Ming and Karna stood in the middle of the battlefield, where the ground could no longer be seen. The two looked at each other. Even Brahmastra Kundala couldn't take you down, Karna said calmly. I didn't hear the surprise in that sentence, Wu Ming said with a smile. Karna just shook his head and said, You can block my Brahmastra Kundala, which means you are indeed the legendary British Silver Dragon Villo. Then he said, It seems that Sodric, the General of Salvation of France, is not you. No, it's your other identity, Villo. Wuming obviously noticed that Karna had a special skill, and he already knew that he was both Sodric and a Villo. Poor man's insight, eh? The ability to see through the other party's character and attribute, and not be deceived by verbal excuses and deceit. I once had the honor to ask the weak about their life and value, so I have the ability to see through the other party's character and attribute, Karna explained. You are not an evil person. In that case, the rumor that the Villo who transformed into the demonic dragon possessed Sodric is a rumor. No, it should be said that the Villo and Sodric are the same person, so the rumor is also correct. Wuming couldn't help but praise, as expected of Karna, the hero of charity. Yes, I am both Sodric and a Villo, but I am now summoned as Sodric, so I only have Sodric's skills and noble phantoms. Karna said, Then in order to show my respect, I will give you my strongest attack. After that, Karna's body began to ignite in flames. Upon closer inspection, the thin and sturdy golden armor on his body began to turn into flames. The flames gathered at the tip of the divine spear transformed from the Brahmastra. Is that so? Then I can't hide it anymore. As he spoke, Wu Ming also raised his silver knight sword. Comprehend the mercy of the King of Gods. Karna raised his spear, and the air around him began to heat up. Indra watched carefully. The armor completely peeled off his body and turned into flames. The damaged ground around him began to melt. Extermination, this stab. The flames wrapped around the tip of the spear, forming a huge lightning spear. At this point, this place was already a sea of flames. Burn completely. A huge sun will shone behind him. Vasvi Shakti, O sun, submit to death. The stars hidden in the world. Meteor Silver's blade began to emit a white light, illuminating everything around it. A sacred sword that can wipe out all evil. Cracks appeared on the body of the sword, and an even more dazzling golden light burst forth from within. There's no need to cover your light anymore. The body of the sword was completely shattered, and a dazzling golden sword of light appeared. It was constantly floating, and the silver sword fragments were attached to the golden sword of light. Shine. The sword of light soared into the sky. Silver meteor. The unparalleled lightning collided with the dazzling starlight. The space somewhere in the sky garden gradually cracked. Sharon and Achilles were in an independent small world. Atlanta and Astolfo, Sieg, Frankenstein, and Cowles were in the residential area of the sky garden. Semiramis and Mordred between the thrones, and Jelly, the lion outside the door. Joan of Arc in the environment, and Shakespeare, who was playing the role of evil. Shiro Amakusa, who was about to walk out of the Great Holy Grail. These people all saw the scene and heard the sound of the world's destruction. Boom, 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 boom. The cracked space directly exploded, and a huge amount of energy violently poured onto the sky garden. A large amount of light seemed to have turned into a substance, raging and destroying everything in the sky garden. Whether it was Achilles and Sharon, who came out of the one-on-one space after removing the star of soaring skies Diatrico Astor Lonk. Atlanta, who realized the crisis and fled quickly, and Astolfo, Sieg, Frankenstein, and Cowles, who were carried by the eagle. They were all desperately running in the opposite direction of the light. To be precise, they were fleeing. Almost everyone used skills or noble phantoms. Achilles used his noble phantoms, which allowed him to pass through the vast battlefield in one breath. Even if there were obstacles in the field, his speed would not be reduced. Sharon used his skill, Divine Wisdom A+, to simulate his own skill as a centaur, 1,000-mile scamper. Divine Wisdom A+. Except for the hero's unique skills, almost all skills, limited to ancient Greece, can be played with BA-level proficiency. 1,000-mile scamper A has endless stamina for long-distance movement, and the agility parameter temporarily increases rapidly. It can also play the effect of increasing the endurance and strength parameter when running at full speed. Atlanta used her skill, Crossing Arcadia. Crossing Arcadia B can move across all obstacles in the field, including the enemy. Because on the edge of crisis, Atlanta did not use another skill, Aesthetics of Pursuit. Aesthetics of Pursuit C. Let the enemy take the lead, and then you can take the lead after confirming the enemy's actions. Although the enemy ran first and she would overtake the enemy first, Atlanta did not dare to use this skill when the light behind her was spreading rapidly. If she did not run fast enough, it would be bad if the light caught up with her. Astolfo, on the other hand, let the eagle carry the four of them and used Hippogriff's trump card, Dimensional Jump. Dimension Jump. After releasing the true name, the eagle and its rider will switch into a blurry posture and disappear when the eagle screeches. It can escape all forms of observation in the world, and even reappear in other places. This ability could be called a bug-level ability, saving the lives of the four of them. No one knew how long it took, the light disappeared, and the original huge sky garden disappeared directly. The Great Holy Grail, which was originally in the center of the sky garden, was also exposed. Next to the Great Holy Grail was Joan of Arc and Shakespeare, who came out of the environment. The hall in the center of the throne was also exposed, revealing Semiramis, Mordred, who was covered in blood, and Jelly, whose body was pierced in many places. Everyone, whether they were servants or masters, looked at the huge sky fortress that was missing half with a trembling mind. Even Fiore and Gold in the distant Mylnia fortress noticed the magical anomaly of the sky garden. Semiramis had a special skill of double summoning, and she also had a caster class. As the noble phantoms of Semiramis' magic workshop, Hanging Garden of Babylon, evolved from the beliefs of many mistaken believers, so it was named Vanity. Because of that, the conditions to activate this noble phantoms were quite harsh. Not only did it require the wood, stone, minerals, plants, water, and other materials from the ruins near Iraq's capital, Baghra, where Semiramis lived, but it also required 3 days and 3 nights of nonstop chanting to complete it. It was really 3 days and 3 nights, that is 72 hours. And now, this magnificent building was about to disappear once again. Chapter 88. Before that, Joan of Arc, who arrived at the Great Holy Grail earlier than anyone else, encountered the biggest irony in history. "Oh, Joan of Arc, welcome to my stage," exclaimed Shakespeare, in a strange whisper, from Joan of Arc's environment. Joan of Arc looked at the changing scene around her and frowned. "This is my hometown, Domremy." Joan of Arc looked at her clothes that had changed into a village girl's style, and looked at the small village not far away. "Jean." A gentle female voice came. Joan of Arc turned to look at the source of the voice. "Mother." Joan of Arc was a little surprised. She didn't expect this environment to be so realistic. "Why? Why are you called a witch and burned to death?" "What, Jean?" Joan of Arc's mother cried and crawled on the ground, her hands holding Joan of Arc tightly. "Come back to the village with me, Jean. Don't worry about other people anymore." Joan of Arc's mother pleaded. But Joan of Arc didn't pay attention to her mother, not because Joan of Arc was unfilial, but because the environment in front of her was just created by Red Caster Shakespeare. "Red Team's caster, are you satisfied with this?" Jean said calmly. Then Shakespeare's voice sounded in the air. "No, the drama has just begun. Let's begin the second act." When Shakespeare's voice fell, Joan of Arc found that there were two curtains in front of her, like the curtain on the opening and the closing stage. One opened. When the curtain opened, the scene in front of Joan of Arc changed again. Joan of Arc stood on a high ground, holding the holy flag in her hand, commanding the French soldiers behind her to rush to the British enemy. For a time, the entire battlefield was covered with blood, and a lot of lives were constantly lost. Some people begged for mercy, but they were still killed. In an instant, Joan of Arc was full of dead bodies. "It's covered with blood, Your Highness Saintess." Shakespeare's voice sounded in the air. However, Joan of Arc didn't have much of a reaction to this. "It's useless to show me anything." Joan of Arc then raised her hand and looked at it. "Since the hands of those who follow me are dirty, then my hands are dirty, and I have never felt fear of this." Suddenly, as if a corpse had come back to life, a gorgeously dressed corpse suddenly sat up, but that face was Shakespeare's. He looked at Joan of Arc and asked, "Then let me ask you as the representative of Charles VII. Then a corpse beside Joan of Arc suddenly raised its head. Needless to say, it was another Shakespeare's face. "You stepped forward bravely, and went to the battlefield. Dirty my hands with blood and win back France." Then the corpses around her raised their heads and asked Joan of Arc, "However, you were burned at the stake in the end. How sad is this? In my opinion, this is betrayal, tragedy, despair. Even so, do you still believe in the Lord? Do you still think that fighting is meaningful?" However, Jean still turned a blind eye to these and replied calmly, "Of course. My death is a fate that I have never escaped." Then Joan of Arc raised the holy flag in her hand and said, "Since I raised this flag, I have lost the right to die peacefully in my hometown." For Joan of Arc, who was not affected in the slightest, Shakespeare was not disappointed. One of the corpses snapped his fingers, and the scene changed. Joan of Arc looked at herself in a prisoner's uniform. Her hands were handcuffed, and the handcuffs were connected to this rope. She was led forward by a knight riding a horse in front of her. In this way, how could Joan of Arc not know where she was now? "What a bad taste, Castor," Joan of Arc said sarcastically to Shakespeare. No, 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 this time it's not you, Lady Saint." The knight riding the horse in front turned back and looked at Joan of Arc. Sure enough, it was another Shakespeare's face. Shakespeare pointed to the front, and Joan of Arc looked in the direction he pointed. Joan of Arc's pupils shrank slightly. Sauterlech. Yes, it was Joan of Arc's childhood friend, General Sauterlech, or Wu Ming, who was burned at the stake in this illusion. Wu Ming's eyes were lifeless as he was tied to a pillar by iron chains. The flames around his body were burning fiercely. Joan of Arc hurriedly ran over, but when she was still a certain distance away from Wu Ming, she was pulled by the rope in her hand. Why didn't you burn me?" Joan of Arc hurriedly asked a priest standing under the execution platform. The priest looked back at Joan of Arc with Shakespeare's face, took out his noble phantasm, and replied to Joan of Arc, "The fantasy constructed by my noble phantasm is your memory. That is to say, the death of General Sauterlech is your idea, Saint Joan of Arc." Shakespeare's last words hit Joan of Arc's heart, and she began to panic. No, no, how could it be? Joan of Arc couldn't help but think of the scene where Sauterlech rushed to her with wounds all over his body, and was burned to death with her. Is it really me? And Shakespeare said like a kidnapper, yes, yes. It's all your fault. At this moment, an incomparably terrifying magical power came this way in Shakespeare's perception, because this magical power was so terrifying that even Joan of Arc, who was in the illusion, noticed it. The illusion where Joan of Arc was shattered like a mirror, and it instantly shattered. What? My noble phantasm is actually... Outside, Shakespeare and Joan of Arc still stood in place. However, on the other side of the hall, the originally gorgeous hall suddenly lost a piece, revealing a vast sky. This magical power is Sauterlech, Joan of Arc said. At this moment, Joan of Arc, who had escaped from the illusion created by Shakespeare's noble phantasm, the hour of the play has arrived, and here shall be thunderous applause, would no longer be deceived by Shakespeare's rhetoric. In comparison, at this moment, Shakespeare had lost his noble phantasm. Subsequently, the floating fortress, hanging garden of Babylon, which had lost half of its power, had completely lost its ability to float. Although the central area had been slightly damaged, this little bit would not be of any help to the sky garden, which had lost half of its floating ability. The reason why the floating garden could float was because of the inverted magic inside. Whether it was water or plants, they would flow and grow in the opposite direction. The water would flow from top to bottom, and the plants would stay from bottom to top. At this moment, in the central area with the Great Holy Grail, a large amount of water began to fly to the sky. After leaving the magic range of the floating garden, it fell to the ground. Not only the water, but a large number of broken buildings began to fall to the ground. The remaining half of the floating garden was also on the verge of collapse, slowly falling to the ground. It was getting faster and faster until it fell to the forest below, making a sound like an earthquake. A large amount of smoke and dust rose to the sky, and it lasted for a long time. Chapter 89. Amidst the ruins of a large number of buildings, a hand suddenly reached out from one of the taller ruins. Accompanied by a burst of debris and dirt, Wyrm struggled to crawl out. Wyrm was covered in wounds, and his broken armor was almost completely gone. Wyrm panted heavily and looked ahead tiredly. He saw another hand reaching out from the taller ruins. However, compared to Wyrm who struggled to climb out, this figure was more illusory and weak. After getting out of the ruins, he half squatted on the ground. Karna could no longer stand. After all, compared to Wyrm who did not sacrifice any defense, Karna had stripped off the armor that was connected to his skin to form Karna's most powerful noble artifact, Sun Wheel, Obedient Death, Vasvi Shakti. In the Hindu mythological narrative Mahabharata, Karna was willing to strip off his armor and give it to the Thunder Emperor Indra because he knew that he had been tricked. Indra was moved and gave Karna a divine spear that could kill everything with one hit. The noble artifact that evolved from it became Karna's strongest defense, and received a certain degree of damage to obtain his most powerful attack. However, because his body was already damaged and had no defense, under the aftermath of the collision between Sun Wheel, Obedient Death Vasvi Shakti, and Meteor Silver Meteor, Karna's injuries were more serious than Wyrm's. Even his spirit core was slightly cracked. Cough. As expected of the legendary knight Vilo, Saranthed. What a beautiful attack. Cough, cough, cough. Karna said to Wyrm with a weak smile. It was obvious that Karna was having a good time even though he was in a terrible state. Wyrm also smiled happily and said, "You don't have to flatter me, Karna. If it weren't for the fact that the virtual space we were in prevented the explosion from spreading, you wouldn't have been so badly injured." Wyrm was right. Because the virtual space was comparable to an inherent barrier. The aftermath of Wyrm and Karna's noble artifacts did not cause it to explode. As a result, the aftermath of the explosion caused secondary damage to Wyrm and Karna, which was why they were in such a sorry state. It was like comparing the damage caused by a bomb exploding in a narrow room with the damage caused by an explosion in an open space. Wyrm was not so bad. Although he was not in his true form, he still had the protection of his incomplete dragon scales, so his spirit core was not damaged. However, he was still injured. Cough cough. I've heard of the Star Holy Sword X Silver. Now that I've seen it, its power is indeed extraordinary. In the face of Karna's praise, Wu Ming felt a little helpless, and blushed inwardly. After all, Wu Ming did not have this noble artifact in the first place. Wu Ming, who was in the real world of Wu Ming, did not have this noble artifact. Even Wu Ming, who was in the real world of Villo, did not have this noble artifact. This noble artifact evolved from one of Wu Ming's skills with the help of suppression. Miracle Legendary? Dragon Legendary? Miracle Legendary? Before Wu Ming faced Karna's strongest attack, he had the belief that he had to win, which led to the activation of this skill. In addition, the suppression of the world where Wu Ming was in had a special relationship with Wu Ming, so to a certain extent, it supported Wu Ming, allowing him to obtain an evolved noble artifact. Silver Meteor, X Silver Meteor. Level, EX type. Evil Noble Artifact Distance? Maximum catch? This was a treasure created by the suppression of the planet. The Sacred Star Sword, which had been released from its suppression, had the effect of judging the enemy as evil. As long as the enemy was the owner's enemy or someone who had to be defeated, the Sacred Star Sword would give the enemy the attribute of evil. The target of the judgment was both a person and an object. Even concepts such as space and time could be included in the judgment. Because the noble artifact was a part of himself, Wu Ming immediately used it after obtaining it. He was not unfamiliar with it at all. The suppression knew that Wu Ming, who was in the real world of Wu Ming, would not be able to defeat Karna, so it forcibly added a noble artifact to Wu Ming by relying on Wu Ming's wait for me skill. Miracle. After all, the character of Sodlek was created by the suppression of history. Adding a noble artifact at the last minute was not a big deal to the suppression. If Wu Ming, who was in the real world of Villo, had been able to tie with Karna, he would have had a mysterious buff. However, as a Sodlek, Wu Ming did not have many mysteries, so he really could not fight against the powerful and mysterious Karna. As the origin dragon, Soren was someone whom the two suppression forces had to curry favor with, so he had to be a good host in his own world. It was precisely because of this that Wu Ming could be considered to have defeated Karna. It was also because of this that Wu Ming blushed. Although the suppression had good intentions, Wu Ming was not someone who could not accept defeat. Wu Ming was not that thick-skinned to be praised by the enemy for defeating him with a power that did not belong to him. However, he could not say that. After all, X Silver was Wu Ming's noble artifact, and X Silver Meteor was an evolved noble artifact that was forcibly catalyzed by the planet's suppression force and the human's suppression force. Even without the suppression force's interference, Wu Ming's X Silver could still evolve into X Silver Meteor, or an evolved noble artifact that was as powerful as X Silver Meteor. This was also the reason why Wu Ming did not hesitate to use X Silver Meteor. It would be his sooner or later, so it did not matter if it was earlier or later. After all, Wu Ming was not a heroic spirit that could not grow. Wu Ming himself could grow, including a part of his noble artifact. Karna could also see that Wu Ming was a little embarrassed. Although he did not know why, he immediately changed the topic. Can you grant me a request, Your Excellency Siren Thod? Karna no longer called Wu Ming Sodric. After all, the power that defeated him was from the Villo. Please speak. Wu Ming looked at Karna, who was about to disappear, and nodded. Even if Karna asked, Wu Ming would find a way to help Karna. After all, this was not a glorious victory. The original master of the red team was caught by assassin with poison. Although the Sky Garden was destroyed and fell, the room where my original master and the others were in was on the other side of the undestroyed Sky Garden. Even if the Sky Garden fell, I don't know if they are okay. Please go there, and help me check the situation. If possible, please save them. Wu Ming was stunned, but he immediately reacted. Then Wu Ming smiled. As expected of Karna, the hero of charity. I'll go now. Wu Ming dragged his broken body to the direction Karna pointed out. Karna, who stayed in place, turned into light and disappeared after his spirit core was completely shattered. Chapter 90. Wuming took out many bottles of healing potion on the way, and after drinking all of them, his body almost recovered. Wuming moved his body, and now, except for the serious injuries on his body, there was no big problem. Because Wuming had the skill Magic Dragon EX, his mana was not damaged much. Wuming came to the place where Karna pointed, and everywhere he looked, there was a ruin. The entire sky garden fell to the ground, and was almost completely shattered. Wuming released his mana, and began to search for the masters who were controlled by Semiramis poison. Those masters before the Red Servant were not ordinary people, but one of the best magicians. Therefore, when Wuming arrived, those magicians still had signs of life that even Wuming almost didn't notice. When Wuming dug them out, their bodies were already badly mutilated. Wuming quickly took out 5 bottles of healing potion, and gave them to each of them to drink. Yggdrasil was a game that transcended its time. Its degree of freedom was so high that it was unbelievable. But in this game, there was only one kind of item, and that was the health potion called Health Potion. There were no other medicinal items such as mana potion, detoxification potion, and so on, so they could only rely on other rare items. Because of that, as the only health potion in the game, its performance was naturally needless to say. If it was placed in a noble artifact, it could be judged as a sea-level item. Although Wuming once gave Astolfo the health potion very easily, it was not a small amount. When he first treated the androids, Wuming ordered everyone to take 1/3 of the health potion. That was to prevent the androids, who acted as a mana supply battery, from being infected by the bacteria in the air as soon as they came out of the incubator. Sieg was a good example. Because he left the incubator for too long, Astolfo said that before Astolfo took Sieg away, Black Archer Sharon gave Sieg a simple treatment. However, androids born as magic power batteries were different from androids born to fight. Because the androids, which were magic-powered batteries, did not need to move around in the outside world, their creators did not give them excellent physical fitness. It could be said that they would not survive without the nutrient solution in the incubator. This was the racial flaw of the androids that were born as props. Although Sieg was saved by Wuming's potion at that time, Wuming did not have a way to solve his gene problem. After all, even if the game had a high degree of freedom, there were no items related to genes. The game was enjoyable, not a headache. Because of the transplanting of Siegfried's heart, Siegfried was strengthened by the dragon heart and eliminated the flaws of the androids. As for whether the heart would disappear or not, since Sieg was connected to the heart, the magic circuits were naturally connected as well. Sieg's heart was supported by Sieg's magic power, so it naturally wouldn't disappear. Over time, his heart would definitely fuse with Sieg's. The androids, who were fighting forces, were not much better. After all, they were weapons that could be thrown away after being used, and they participated in the battle as cannon fodder. The androids that were rescued had their physical fitness temporarily improved by Wuming's potion at that time. It was mainly thanks to Gould, the creator, who adjusted their physical condition later on, that they could live like ordinary people. As for the 5 masters, Wuming was still afraid that they would die halfway, so he gave them a whole bottle of the potion. It must be noted that this was a potion that was comparable to a C-grade item. Seeing that the 5 masters had not woken up yet, Wuming remembered that Karna said that they were poisoned. Wuming immediately took out a short staff. This short staff could remove the poison status of any item below the divine artifact level. It was an item that could be used by injecting magic power into it. However, it had a limited number of uses. After the number of uses was used up, it would disappear. It was because Wuming was restricted by his class that Wuming took out this high-level item with restrictions. Moreover, Wuming speculated that the poison used by Semiramis was definitely not a high-level poison, otherwise, these people would have died long ago. Detoxification. The short staff emitted a green light, enveloping the 5 unconscious people. After a few seconds, the short staff shattered and disappeared. Wuming looked at the short staff that disappeared in his hand and couldn't help but sigh. As expected of the poison used by Semiramis, the most ancient poisoner, it completely exhausted the short staff's number of uses. Although the level of this poison was not the highest, it still exhausted the detoxification short staff's number of uses. A few seconds later, The 5 people lying on the ground opened their eyes and sat up weakly. This place is... I remember the Holy Grail War is over. What happened to us? Everyone was full of doubts. Then Wuming spoke. Magicians, I am a servant of this Holy Grail War. This Holy Grail War is not over yet. You have now lost the qualification to be its master. As for what happened, you can find out in the future. This place will soon become the battlefield of a great war. After Wuming finished speaking, he turned into a spirit and disappeared. These magicians looked at the place where Wuming disappeared. They could see that the person just now was not an ordinary person. And they chose to believe in Wuming. They immediately struggled to stand up and walked in the direction that Wuming just pointed. After Wuming gave advice to the group of magicians, he went to the place where the Great Holy Grail was. Fortunately, this was a forest. If it fell into the city, it would be troublesome. Wuming thought. When Wuming arrived at the Great Holy Grail, he saw 2 groups of people facing each other. The Great Holy Grail was revealed from the ruins. It was a ball with a huge female sculpture inside. In front of the Great Holy Grail, 2 groups of people stood in front of the Great Holy Grail. On one side, there was Red Assassin Semiramis, Red Rider Achilles, Red Archer Atlanta, Red Caster Shakespeare, and Ruler Shiro Amakusa, who hurriedly came out because of the fall of the Sky Garden. On the other side, there was Red Saber Mordred, Lion Jelly, who was the master of Wuming and Mordred, Black Archer Sharon, Black Rider Astolfo, and Astolfo's master Sieg, Black Berserker Frankenstein, and Frankenstein's master Cowls, and finally Ruler Joan of Arc, the referee of the Holy Grail War. In addition to the masters, when the servants saw the arrival of Wuming, Amakusa's people's faces changed slightly, while Joan of Arc's people were happy. Although it seemed that Joan of Arc's side had more people, in terms of heroic spirit strength, they were still stronger than Shiro Amakusa's party. If they really fought, the black side might not necessarily have an advantage, but now with Wuming, the situation was completely reversed. Only Wuming rushed over, which meant that Karna was defeated. A servant who could defeat Karna was better than Amakusa's side. Looking at Wuming's seemingly unscathed appearance, Shiro Amakusa couldn't help but frown. I didn't expect you to win against Lancer. You're not Sodric, are you, Vilo, Knight of the Round Table? Shiro Amakusa said. After all, such a powerful holy sort of star, even based on Semiramis' description, Shiro Amakusa was sure that it was the noble phantasm of the Knights of the Round Table, Vilo. Wuming stood beside Joan of Arc, and his helmet began to disintegrate and attach to his shoulder. Then Wuming looked at Joan of Arc and the others, who were in a sorry state but didn't suffer any injuries. Wuming first smiled at Joan of Arc, then looked at Shiro Amakusa. Then you've guessed wrong, Shiro Amakusa. I am indeed Sodric, but that's only because I'm also a Knight of the Round Table, Vero. This time, I'm only being summoned as Sodric. Chapter 91. Because Joan of Arc and the others had already been informed by Wuming, they weren't surprised. However, seeing that the people from Amakusa weren't surprised either, it seemed that they had already been informed by Shiro Amakusa. Achilles and Atlanta revealed an expression that said, "So that's really the case." Shakespeare, on the other hand, had a happy expression. Semiramis gritted her teeth. After all, her noble artifact had been destroyed by Wuming. Shiro Amakusa smiled faintly. I really didn't expect that you, whom I met once, would become a major force to obstruct me. In response, Wuming shook his head regretfully and said, even without me, others would obstruct you. Then, do you want to come to my side, Knight of the Round Table, Silver Dragon Britain Vilo? Shiro Amakusa smiled. Everyone was shocked. After all, most people, no, almost everyone, didn't want to rope in the enemy during the final battle. Wuming also smiled and said, do you want me to agree with the materialization of the soul, Shiro Amakusa? Shiro Amakusa continued to smile. That's right. Don't you think that the materialization of the soul is the only way to save humanity? You don't want humanity to repeat the same mistakes you've made in Britain, Vilo Silensword. Then the scene fell into silence. After a moment, Wuming spoke. Yes, humans will indeed repeat the same mistakes. Shiro Amakusa smiled. The others also looked at Shiro Amakusa and Wuming in disbelief. If it was me in the past, I might have agreed with you. But Wuming thought of his experience in Babylon, and thought of Gilgamesh, who wanted to free humanity from the shackles of the gods. Now, I definitely won't agree with you, Shiro Amakusa. Wuming raised Meteor Silver, which had already returned to its original state, and pointed the tip of the sword at Shiro Amakusa. The helmet automatically put on. Is that so? Shiro Amakusa closed his eyes and said regretfully. When he opened his eyes, Shiro Amakusa didn't have the slightest bit of hatred, only calmness. At this moment, this was the saint who had given up on hatred and walked out of the Great Holy Grail. Shiro Amakusa, Shurjun. Then I will kill everyone who stands in my way. With these words, a war was about to break out. Atlanta took the initiative to release her noble artifact. Present this calamity. Foiboskichi. Large amounts of lightning shot towards Wuming's group, but what collided with them was a large amount of green lightning. Blasted tree. Frankenstein used his incomplete noble phantasm to clash with it. Although Frankenstein didn't speak much, it didn't mean that she couldn't speak. In her words, it was just that it took a lot of effort to speak. Astolfo rode his eagle and rushed towards Atlanta, but he was stopped by Achilles in midair. Get down. Achilles leaped up and chopped down the eagle and Astolfo with his spear. Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh! When Achilles landed on the ground, a few arrows shot into his shoulder and thigh. Charon stood in the distance with his bow raised, ready to knock an arrow again. Suddenly he felt a huge threat and quickly dodged. A few chains made of poison pierced where Charon was standing just now. TSK, he dodged it. Am I so weak now that I've lost my noble artifact? Semiramis said unhappily. As soon as Semiramis finished speaking, Charon felt a slight discomfort in his body. He quickly activated the crystal that Wuming gave him, and the feeling was gone. That was Hydra's poison. Charon said with lingering fear. Everyone, be careful. The surroundings are filled with poison, Charon shouted. The others nodded and activated the detoxification crystal that Wuming gave them, including the two masters, Sieg and Collins. Jean, go and take care of Red Assassin. I'll deal with Shiro Amakusa, Wuming said to Jean. Okay. Jean simply nodded, then raised the holy flag and rushed toward Semiramis. Suddenly, Wuming threw a ring to Jean. This was the ring that Wuming wore on his hand, the Ouroboros ring. Although Wuming didn't know how to use this world-class item, it had a special function. Wear it and you can resist Red Caster's spiritual attack. Joan of Arc nodded heavily and rushed towards Semiramis. Mordred, do as you say. After hearing Wuming's words, Mordred grinned and bumped her fists, then said, Then I must teach that poisonous woman a lesson. Wu Ming, on the other hand, was facing Shiro Amakusa, Shurjun. As the leader of the believers, Shiro Amakusa was already very good for him to have such martial arts skills. But if the enemy was Wuming, Shiro Amakusa had no ability to resist. Bang! Shiro Amakusa's body rolled and stopped in front of the Great Holy Grail. Pwah! Shiro Amakusa spat out a mouthful of blood and struggled to stand up. Then Shiro Amakusa once again rushed toward Wuming and roared, Vilo Sarinth! Bang! Another blow, and Shiro Amakusa once again collapsed on the ground. Wuming looked at Shiro Amakusa, who was struggling to get up, and sighed. Shiro Amakusa, you still don't want to give up? Wuming looked at the battle between the other servants. Sharon, Astolfo, Frankenstein, Achilles and Atlanta were fighting, especially Sharon and Achilles. Because it was not a one-on-one battle. Neither of them fought as a warrior, but as an archer and a rider. Astolfo and Frankenstein constantly harassed Achilles, coupled with Charon's godlike archery skills. Although Achilles used his noble phantasm, Sharon had already used his once-a-day noble phantasm, Scorpio Strike, to break Achilles' immortality, which was the noble phantasm, Andreas Amarantos. Damn it. Achilles, who was on the chariot, cursed, and then just when he wanted to take out his trump card noble phantasm, Achilles Cosmos, several powerful arrows flew at Achilles. Because Atlanta was entangled by Frankenstein, and Astolfo was constantly harassing them in the sky, Achilles could not take out his trump card. "Do you think I will let you take out that shield, Achilles?" Charon said to Achilles, and once again drew his bow. "Charon." Achilles was angry again, and he drove the chariot toward Charon, but this time Astolpho seized the opportunity. Trap of Argalia. Astolpho rode the eagle and pierced the chariot's wheels with his spear, and the wheels were forcibly spiritualized. Achilles quickly jumped out of the chariot, and Atlanta just happened to avoid Frankenstein's attack and jumped to Achilles' side. At this moment, Astolpho, Frankenstein, and Charon surrounded Achilles and Atlanta in a tripartite formation. On the other side, Joan of Arc and Mordred were fighting against Semiramis and Shakespeare. It seemed to be a 2v2, but it was actually a 2v1. After all, Shakespeare had no combat power at all. "What the hell are you doing? Castor, where is your noble phantasm? Hurry up and use it." Semiramis was repelled by Joan of Arc and roared at Shakespeare. "My noble phantasm doesn't work on Joan of Arc. Empress, you have to do your best." Shakespeare bowed to Shakespeare and said very elegantly. Joan of Arc looked at the Ouroboros on her hand, clenched it, and rushed toward Semiramis again. The special ability of the Ouroboros ring was the protection of the world. World's blessing. As the incarnation of the world devoured by the devourer of 9 luminaries' world, it has the blessing of a world. Although this statement was very vague, Wyrm knew that a tool transformed from a world was not that simple. At least it had resistance to mental attacks. Sure enough, the world's path had the power to resist mental attacks. Just when Semiramis was ready to resist Joan of Arc's attack, a voice broke through the air. "Take this, poisonous woman." Chapter 92. Semiramis' pupils instantly froze as she raised her head to look at Mordred, who was falling from the sky. "Poochie." "Ah!" Mordred's brilliant imperial sword cut through Semiramis' chest and blood spilled all over the ground. "Checkmate. Poisonous woman." Mordred turned around to look at Semiramis, who had fallen to the ground, and said proudly. Joan of Arc also walked in front of Shakespeare and said to him, "Red Castor, do you still want to resist?" Shakespeare hurriedly waved his hand. No, I really don't have the ability to fight. I surrender." Saying that, Shakespeare raised his hand. "You bastard, do you have to be so spineless? You actually surrendered." Mordred said viciously. No, this is a wise choice." Shakespeare's face was full of joy. Turning around, Wyrm looked at Shiro Amakusa. "You see, you have already lost, Shiro Amakusa." Shiro Amakusa, Shurgen, continued to stand up and slowly said, "So what?" Shiro Amakusa stared at Wyrm. "You want to use failure to change my mind about saving humanity?" 400 years ago, when we were slaughtered by the shogunate, I didn't retreat. How can death and failure make me change my mind about saving humanity? After a moment, Wyrm looked at Shiro Amakusa, who had calmed down a little. He took off his helmet and looked at Shiro Amakusa. "You are not wrong, Shiro Amakusa. However, this is a war where the winner takes all. The loser will lose the opportunity to realize their dreams." After hearing Wyrm's words, Shiro Amakusa laughed again. "What a pity," Vilo there answered. "The Great Holy Grail has already been activated." As if to confirm Shiro Amakusa's words, the Great Holy Grail behind him began to gradually glow and slowly sank into the ground. "Originally, I wanted to use the Space Garden to move the Great Holy Grail and spread the Third Law all over the world. However, now that the Space Garden has been destroyed, the Great Holy Grail has coincidentally come into contact with a spirit vein. At this moment, it has already begun to use the spirit vein to spread the Third Law all over the world, realizing the materialization of all humans. My wish is about to come true," Shiro Amakusa said very calmly. "Aren't you afraid that I'll destroy the Great Holy Grail if you tell me all this now?" Wyrm wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he continued his conversation with Shiro Amakusa. In response, Shiro Amakusa shook his head and said, "You won't. Everyone who participated in the Holy Grail War has their own wishes. Even you Villotharanst are the same." Shiro Amakusa was right. Every servant who participated in the Holy Grail War had their own wishes. No one would destroy the Great Holy Grail before it was completely beyond saving. Wuming believed that even Artoria would not take the initiative to destroy the Holy Grail. Unfortunately, Wuming didn't have any wishes that needed to be fulfilled. Moreover, he didn't believe that a mere large-scale magic storage system would be able to fulfill all his wishes. The suppression force once told him that the Holy Grail War was a ritual created by the three families of Macri, Einsberg, and Inosaka to reach the origin. The original purpose was to reach the origin. The Great Holy Grail could temporarily open the door to the origin vortex. Through this door, the magician could directly reach the origin. Therefore, the matter of fulfilling all wishes was purely a rumor. Of course, some small wishes could still be fulfilled. After all, this was a magical power that could open the door to the origin vortex. Shiro Amakusa entered the Great Holy Grail system through his own noble phantasm. Through the incomplete third magic that came with the Great Holy Grail, Shiro Amakusa made a wish to save all of humanity, allowing the third magic to spread throughout the world. Is that so? But you won't see the end. Goodbye, Shiro Amakusa. You are a person worthy of respect. His hand rose, and his sword fell. With a smile on his face, Shiro Amakusa fell to the ground. The other servants of the red team began to leave because of the death of their master, Shiro Amakusa. Achilles and Atlanta looked at their bodies gradually disappearing, and gave up resistance. Sharon, Astolfo, and Frankenstein also did not continue to attack. What a pity, Wani-san. Achilles smiled. Ah, that's right. It's a pity that we can't see the end. But the Great Holy Grail has been activated. It's just a matter of time. Atlanta said calmly without the slightest regret or rejoice. Then Achilles looked at Sharon. Sensei, this one-on-one duel was interrupted. Next time, we must determine the winner. Of course, Achilles. I look forward to the moment when you defeat me. The wind came, and Achilles and Atlanta disappeared into light. On the other side, Semiramis lay on the ground powerlessly, looking at the body of Shiro Amakusa. Master, I actually feel sad. What's wrong with me? The famous Empress of Assyria left the stage. Oh, this is really a wonderful comedy. I am very satisfied. Shakespeare wrote the script and disappeared into particles. At this point, the red team servants of the Great Holy Grail left except for Mordred. So, what about the Great Holy Grail? It seems that it can't be stopped. Astolfo stood beside Sieg. Sieg, Cowles, and Leo were unable to get involved in the battle of servants as humans, so they were slightly away from the battlefield before the start. Do we really have to destroy this? That's such a pity, Mordred grumbled. It seems that this is the only way. Jean said carefully. After all, not every servant would sacrifice their wish for humans. Wuming looked at the several servants present. Sharon, Astolfo, Frankenstein, Mordred, and Jean. In addition to himself and Jean, there were 5 servants. Sharon was the first to speak. I choose to give up. Instead of restoring my immortal body, it's better to choose to save humans. I also give up. Anyway, I don't have any important wish. It doesn't matter. This is also for Master. Astolfo smiled and then looked at Sieg. I don't need the Holy Grail. My people have been saved. I thank Sodric again. No, Mr. Villo. Sieg bowed to Wuming. You don't have to do this, Sieg. This is also my agreement with Sieg. Wuming waved his hand, indicating that Sieg didn't need to do this. Ooh. Frankenstein also shook his head. Although he didn't know why Frankenstein didn't hesitate, perhaps Cowles had already prepared himself mentally in advance. I also give up. We will solve the matter of our Yugo Marinia family, Cowles said firmly. I don't need the Holy Grail. I have found my real wish. This time, let's forget about it. Mordred laughed. Leo was a little surprised and then fell into deep thought. Then Leo opened his mouth. Then I will also give up. Mordred smiled knowingly and looked at Leo Gielli. Leo Gielli also smiled knowingly and bumped their fists. In that case, Master, use all the command seals to support me. I am going to change my class. Huh. Everyone was surprised. Chapter 93. Wait, what did you say? Change classes? Leo Gielli asked in surprise. Really? Is this something that a servant can do? Collins asked Wu Ming. The others also looked at Wu Ming in shock. In this regard, Wu Ming smiled. Of course, my own strength is still limited, but if I rely on this then, Wu Ming said, then pointed to the Great Holy Grail behind him. You mean rely on the Great Holy Grail to make a wish? But the Great Holy Grail has now been made a wish by Shiro Amakusa. Liu Jieli was very puzzled. Although the Great Holy Grail has been made a wish by Shiro Amakusa, don't forget that this Great Holy Grail was directly taken away by Danica in the middle of the Third Holy Grail War 60 years ago. In other words, the Great Holy Grail has stored 120 years of magic. Even if Shiro Amakusa has made a wish, there is still some magic left in the Great Holy Grail. With the command seal provided by Master, it is enough for me to change classes, Wu Ming explained. Then what class do you want to change? Karen asked the question that everyone wanted to ask. Wu Ming smiled mysteriously and said, of course it's the caster class. But even if you are a Villo of the Knights of the Round Table, I remember that Villo only knows some small magic. That should not be enough to deal with the current situation, right? Liu Jieli asked. You can rest assured that my body is the original dragon. How can I only have one identity? Everyone then remembered that Wu Ming had previously said that he had many experiences in other worlds. Since Wu Ming could go to other worlds, there was no guarantee that Wu Ming had other identities in this world. Afterward, Lion Jieli sighed. I understand. Then I will use the command change class as the command and use the command seal. After a while, the ruins around the Great Holy Grail were cleared by the party. Then, Wu Ming took out all kinds of ores, gems, and other tools that could be used to construct magic circles in Dragonist. He melted them with his mana, and began to draw a summoning circle in front of the Great Holy Grail. After all, changing classes was something inconceivable for a servant, so he had to be cautious. That was why Wu Ming used the summoning circle. After Wu Ming finished his preparations, he stood in the center of the magic array. Let's begin, Master, Wu Ming said to Jieli. Yes. Everyone stood not far away from the lion's realm of calamity, watching this unbelievable scene with rapt attention. Jieli the lion raised his hand that held Wu Ming's command seal. At the cost of all command incantations, my servant Sodric, change your class. After Lion Jie finished speaking, the command incantation in his hand emitted a red light and disappeared. Wu Ming felt the power of the command incantation and began to make a wish. Great Holy Grail, fulfill my wish and let me change my class. In an instant, the Great Holy Grail began to shine. The magic lines around the magic array where Wu Ming stood also began to shine. The light became brighter and brighter. Everyone began to be unable to bear it, and raised their hands to cover their eyes. After about 10 seconds, the light began to weaken. Everyone once again looked at the place where Wu Ming stood. Wu Ming was wearing a white robe. His originally black hair had turned golden. He held an ancient book of unknown origins in his hand. He looked holy, and his surroundings were filled with a holy aura. What happened? Is the contract broken? Everyone heard Jieli the lion's words, and then looked at him. The command incantation that Lion Jie used on Jie's hand disappeared without a trace. According to the records of the Holy Grail War, a command incantation would leave a trace after it was used. Even if the contract was broken or the Holy Grail War ended, the command incantation would not disappear. Only the traces of the command incantation would disappear. But now, the Holy Grail War was not over yet, and the traces of the command incantation disappeared. Moreover, Jieli also clearly stated that the contract was broken. Don't worry. A particularly gentle voice came. Collins and Jieli were a little absent-minded, but then the two of them quickly woke up. Several other servants were also slightly absent-minded, but it did not affect them much. And because Sieg had Siegfried's heart, his resistance was comparable to that of a servant. Only Jin Di, Arc could resist the strange holiness emitted by Wu Ming. What's going on, Sodric? Or are you no longer Sodric? Jean asked Wu Ming, somewhat at a loss. Everyone looked at Wu Ming with some vigilance. Wu Ming only smiled faintly at this, causing people to become absent-minded again. I'm sorry. After all, this is the first time I've adapted to this class. I'm still a little uncomfortable with my own power. After Wuming finished speaking, everyone felt that the sacred aura on Wuming's body was covered up. Phew, that was really scary. I felt like I was worshipping Sadrik just now. Collins wiped the cold sweat from the lingering fear. That's true. If Sadrik spreads this sacred aura to the maximum extent, some people with low spiritual power will become his believers. I'm afraid some berserkers will also be affected. As a person who firmly believed in the Lord, it was easy for Jean to see the essence of this power. That's really scary. Collins swallowed his saliva. At this moment, Collins was even more scared. Yes, after all, I didn't control my power. I'm sorry, Mr. Collins, Wuming said gently. About the breaking of the contract, it was my decision. After all, what I'm going to do later is a bit unbearable for Mr. Jieli. Therefore, I linked the contract to the Holy Grail. What? Doesn't that mean that you have infinite magic power now? Astolfo cried out in surprise. Wuming smiled and replied, That's not the case. Although I'm linked to the Holy Grail, I can't use the Holy Grail's magical power. Now I just have an unconscious master who can provide more magical power. In short, just like me, the Holy Grail provides magical power directly, but magical power can't be abused at will. Jean explained. Oh, I see. Astolfo's left hand turned into a fist and his right hand turned into a palm. By the way, everyone, I'm no longer Sadrik. I know you're not Sadrik, but I can't figure out what your identity is. I can't even see your real name with my master's ability, Jieli said while touching his chin. Everyone looked at Jean d'Arc, and Jean d'Arc nodded and began to use true name detection on Wuming. This is? Chapter 94. This true? Zod. No, I should call you Henryong-sama. Jean was surprised. In an instant, everyone fell into silence. Wait. Henryong, is that Henryong? Lion Jieli shouted. Hey, is it true? Is it really Henryong? Collins was also quite surprised. The servants were okay. After all, they were heroes. But Sieg was puzzled. What does Henryong refer to? After all, Sieg was an android who was born less than a year ago. Even if he had Siegfried's heart, he was still an android who was less than a year old. Let me tell you. Astolfo raised his hand. When it comes to Henryong, he is the guardian of the ancient Babylonian city of Uruk. After all, no matter in the mythology of any other country or race, there is no character who can be called the Sage Dragon. Legend has it that Henryong is the oldest G. O. D who can't stand the human race being ruled by the gods and secretly came down to help the human race become independent. Later, Lion Jieli went on to say, Henryong is the oldest G. O. D in Mesopotamia. His status as a G. O. D can be compared with Tiamat, the Sumer mythical creator of Mesopotamia. But it is more said that Henryong is the son of Tiamat, the god of Sumer mythical pantheon. In addition to the 11 magical beasts born by Tiamat, he is also the elder brother of the 11 magical beasts. Collins added. But for some reason, the virtuous dragon did not belong to the side of the gods, nor did it belong to the side of the magical beasts. One day, it descended upon the city of Uruk and became the guardian god of mankind, Sharon said. Legend has it that Henryong is quite mysterious. He has neither a fixed name nor a fixed body. The reason why he is called Henryong is because in the oldest epic, the Epic of Gilgamesh, he came to Uruk in the form of a dragon and cultivated the oldest king, the hero king Gilgamesh. As the symbol of the end of the gods, he has the title of sage. Back to Astolfo. Amazing. Does this mean that the French general Sodlek is a Sumerian god? Sieg exclaimed in shock. Everyone thought about it and realized that it was indeed as Sieg had said. The French general Sodlek was a Sumerian god. At this moment, Wuming seemed a little unnatural. How would I know that just because I taught the ancient king on a whim, the restraints turned me into such a fantasy legend? What Tiamat? What Lord God? Do you believe such nonsense? Even if there are historical records, do you believe it? Oh my God! But on the surface, Wuming still maintained a smile. But reality proved that the two restraints once again created an invincible identity for Wuming. Although the origin dragon would become as invincible as the legends said after reaching adulthood, Wuming was still quite a distance away from adulthood. For now, Wuming only had a strong life force and powerful support-type talents. There was still a long way to go before he could reach the level of the god of creation, Tiamat. Ahem. Alright everyone, don't get so worked up. After all, I'm a special dragon who can freely roam through all eras. It's not a problem to have more legends. Also, when I'm a character, I can't use powers outside of the norm. Otherwise, that era will instantly reject me. Also, just continue to call me Sodlek. After all, as Hyunryong, I don't have a real name. Everyone understood. After all, in the historical records, there was indeed no mention of Hyunryong. There was only the name Hyunryong. After everyone calmed down, only Jean seemed to be unable to let go of something. She seemed to be thinking about something. But because time was tight, Jean didn't intend to ask anything here. Of course, Wuming also realized it. As someone who grew up and died with Joan of Arc, how could he not know what his childhood sweetheart was thinking? But just as Joan of Arc thought, there wasn't much time left. Wuming flipped through the uninscribed incantation book in his hand, and large amounts of unknown magic appeared on the Great Holy Grail. Now almost half of the Great Holy Grail had sunk into the ground. So, I'm going to take the exam, Wuming said. Everyone was a little surprised. They thought that Wuming had already started. In fact, they weren't wrong. Wuming had indeed started, but after becoming caster, he became interested in the Great Holy Grail. Of course, it wasn't a wish, but an interest in the third method. Therefore, Wuming decided, Ancient and eternal primordial dragon, show yourself and save the world once more. As soon as his voice fell, a large amount of magic began to gather from the Great Holy Grail into Wuming's body. Then, Wuming's noble artifact began to appear. Heaven Age. At this moment, everyone, including the entire Romania and even the powerful magicians all over the world, felt an extraordinary pressure. A huge silver-white dragon appeared out of thin air. It was mysterious and sacred, giving people a sense of worship. Lion Jia and Cowles had already knelt down, and were mumbling to themselves. Sieg struggled, his legs bent. Because of Sieg's heart, he was not like Leo Jieli and Collins. Astolfo supported Sieg on the side, although he was also uncomfortable. Even with the enhancement of the noble relic, the white dragon was still able to affect Astolfo. The other servants were the same. Those who had magic affinity were fine. Those who didn't have magic affinity were almost the same as Sieg. Tulifas and all the residents of Romania were like pilgrims, kneeling in the direction of the great white dragon. The great white dragon landed and looked at Wuming and the others. Then, without saying anything, he directly grabbed the Great Holy Grail that had sunk into the ground with his hand. Like an uprooted tree, dust flew everywhere. Then the great white dragon grabbed the spherical Great Holy Grail with one claw and flew into the sky. Maybe because it was the first time he used this noble artifact, Wuming triggered the punishment of this era. Just as the dragon's body gradually became transparent, as if it was about to disappear, a lightning bolt appeared out of thin air and struck the dragon. However, the great white dragon did not howl, but disappeared. At this time, the great white dragon that affected Romania, and even the whole world left. The humans who were affected by the great white dragon's sacred breath were gradually recovering at this moment. When Leo Jieli and Collins came back to their senses, they saw a group of extremely weak servants, including Wuming. Just now that was... Collins stuttered. Wuming gasped and replied. That was my original body, the original dragon at the root. Yes, one of Wuming's noble artifacts as a caster was to summon his original body. After all, Wuming was now using a body purely composed of magic. Wuming summoned his original body that was sleeping in the root. At the moment when the great white dragon appeared, the great white dragon and Wuming had the same thought. Just like Wuming was controlling the great white dragon, or the great white dragon was controlling Wuming, the two were the same person. The original body that was summoned by Wuming's noble artifact as a caster did not have the ability to travel through the world on its own, and it also became rejected by the world. Although it was hard to believe, it was the truth. But because the modern era was the era of the disappearance of high-level mysterious creatures such as the Great White Dragon, the era would not allow such creatures to appear in the world. Therefore, when the Great White Dragon left, the punishment of the era came. The Great White Dragon seemed to be unaffected, but in fact it was all fed back to Wuming. At this moment, the magic in Wuming's body was almost exhausted. That's right, the Yex-level magic was almost exhausted now. Because Wuming used magic to offset the damage of the punishment on himself, it had not completely offset the punishment brought by the era. It's terrible. Liu Jieli said. Yes, that involuntary kneeling from the heart was terrible. Chapter 95. Indeed, after all, it's my first time using this noble phantasm. I subconsciously activated the sacred aura emitted by my body. I'm really sorry, everyone. Wuming said with a face full of guilt. Wuming's noble phantasm would open a channel in his body. This channel was big enough to accommodate his body, and small enough to accommodate even a scale. In other words, Wuming could achieve the emergence of part of his body by not fully releasing this noble phantasm. Imagine that when the opponent released a big move, he could suddenly summon the invincible dragon scale in front of him, blocking the enemy's attack. He could also summon the sharp dragon claw in his hand, and use it as a weapon. As for his other noble phantasms, except for the inscription book, the other noble phantasms were obtained through sublimation. Wuming couldn't help but think of the two major restraints. There was no doubt that many noble phantasms of his caster class were their masterpieces, including his caster class template. I didn't expect that, Vilo. You're so strong. If you weren't forced to leave, Father might not have to work so hard. Even if Mordred was weak because of the White Dragon, she was still full of energy when she spoke. However, this unintentional sentence made Wuming silent. Perhaps she realized that she had said something wrong, so Mordred quickly changed the topic. By the way, where did your body go with the Great Holy Grail? Wuming breathed a sigh of relief, then said with a smile, Of course, it's the origin. Everyone had an expression of sure enough. My body has been sleeping in the origin. I just woke it up for a moment and summoned it to the present world. And I have to prepare to bear the punishment given by the era. This time, I almost died. Wuming said and coughed a few times. Jean walked behind Wuming and shook Wuming's back. Are you okay? Jean looked at Wuming tenderly. No matter who Wuming was, he had always been Jean's childhood sweetheart, the one who was willing to be burned to death. It's nothing serious. Don't worry. Wuming held Joan of Arc's hand and said tenderly. I have a question. Since the Great Holy Grail is no longer in this world, why haven't we disappeared yet? Astolfo raised his hand and asked the others. That's right. The Holy Grail has already disappeared, but our contract still exists, and it shows no signs of disappearing. Sharon analyzed. What's going on? Everyone was puzzled. Let me explain. Wuming stood up and looked at the servants and masters. Because when I was moving the Great Holy Grail, I deliberately delayed your contracts for a period of time. This way, you can stay in the modern world and experience life. If you don't use a relic, you can survive for about 3 months. What? I thought it would always be there. Astolfo was a little dejected. It's okay, Ryder. Even if it's only for 3 months, I'll still accompany you. Let's travel around the world together. I want to see this world and connect with the humans of this world, Sieg said from the side. Yes. Master, looking at the rejuvenated Astolfo, the other servants couldn't help but laugh. And then they thought about how to spend the rest of their time. That's it for the time being. As long as you don't do anything that violates the rules of the servants and be ordinary people, I believe our Saintess won't say anything. Right, Saintess, Wuming said softly to Joan of Arc. Cough. Since everyone helped me solve this crisis, I, as the ruler, allow everyone to move freely until we return to the Valhalla, but you can't use your power at will to avoid unnecessary trouble. Joan of Arc looked deeply at Wuming, and then said, especially you, Soderlek. You will be personally supervised by me. That's it. In this regard, Wuming smiled awkwardly, followed by the others. If you don't mind, the Yugo Marinia family can provide you with food, clothing, housing, and transportation for the time being. Collins said the biggest problem at present. Then we won't be polite, and with us, we should be able to fight for a big advantage when dealing with the Clock Tower and the Magic Association, Wuming said with a smile. Looking at Wuming's smiling face, Collins smiled awkwardly. He did have such an idea, but he wanted to express his gratitude for this time. After all, in the case of Danik's death, Wuming had the power to destroy the Yugo Marinia family, but Wuming didn't do so. Although this was the intention of using the Yugo Marinia family, when Collins' sister File was facing Jack the Ripper, Wuming appeared to save File. Based on this alone, Collins, who was already the acting patriarch, was grateful. Wuming also knew that Collins was grateful, and dealing with the clock tower was just a matter of convenience. After all, Wuming was not a bad person, and Wuming felt that the current Yugo Marinia family was very good, so he would definitely help if he could. Don't worry about that for now. Let's go drink, Philo. Mordred shouted excitedly. Wuming looked at Jean subconsciously. Drinking is bad for the body. Please drink less. I won't follow you. I'll wait for you at the Yugo Marinia family. Remember to come back early in the evening, Jean said naturally. However, Mordred complained. What? Ruler, you are like a housekeeper. Drinking is a rare entertainment for us Knights of the Round Table. As if thinking of something, Mordred said again. By the way, it seems that because you took the soldiers to drink secretly, you were often taught a lesson by father and others. Looking at the bright smile on Mordred's face, Wuming smiled and said, If I didn't take the soldiers to drink, how could a lonely guy like you live so comfortably? Then Jieli complained. I knew it. I didn't know that the rebellious knight liked to drink. So it was you who taught him. Really, my wallet has shrunk a lot recently. Ha 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 ha. It doesn't matter. Anyway, your money is useless. You might as well spend it. Mordred laughed and patted Jieli's back. It's going to break, it's going to break. Wuming recalled the past at this moment with a nostalgic look on his face. It was because of those who passed away that Wuming was able to grow. Moreover, Wuming looked at Jean, and Jean also looked at Wuming. The two looked at each other and smiled. Looking at the slowly rising sun, Wuming said to the group behind him, Let's go, everyone. Chapter 96. Because of the mysterious arrival, nearly 3 months had passed since the world was in turmoil. From that day on, Wuming accompanied Collins to the Time Tower. Because Wuming didn't deliberately hide his power, he deliberately released a trace of his power, causing a sensation in the Time Tower. After all, he was a top heroic spirit that could cause a higher level of mystery to descend. Not only did the 12 monarchs of the Time Tower appear together, but even the Marshal of the Demon Path, Kithii Zelik Shobin Ogu, invited Wuming to his office and had a secret conversation with only the two of them. After almost an hour of secret conversation, Kishua Zelrich Subian Ogu indicated that as long as Cowles, the head of the family, could become a student of the Clock Tower, it could offset the crime of the Yugo Marinia family. Of course, Wuming also gave Kithii Zelik Shobin Ogu something special, which made the Time Tower and the Magic Association not dissatisfied with forgiving the Yugo Marinia family so easily. Wuming's evaluation of him. A cunning old fox. At that time, Zelik said. After all, Hyenryong Sama gave me a good gift, so let's leave it at that for the time being. Wuming was speechless. He dared to say that the gift to the Magic Association was his own. In fact, no one would dare to say anything even if that was the case. Kithii Zelik Shobin Ogu was beyond human standards. On this day, 3 months later, in a villa provided by Yugo Marinia in France for Wuming, Wuming sat on a stone in the yard with his hands on his knees and meditated for a long time. First, Wuming's former saber rank limited the progress of meditation. Second, the body of a servant was not suitable for cultivation. After all, this was a degraded version of a heroic spirit. Its attributes were fixed, and even if it cultivated, it would not increase in the slightest. But for Wuming, there was a benefit. After Wuming summoned his main body, Wuming found that his main body had an indescribable feeling. Wuming felt that because the limiter temporarily disappeared when he summoned the main body, all the training that Wuming got from the servant body returned to the main body. Although there would not be an actual increase in strength, there was a familiar feeling. Even if he trained again, it would only take a short period of time for him to integrate everything that Wuming had experienced, trained, and obtained in the servant's body, including the relic. The existence of the relic was the most powerful thing that Wuming had obtained. Wuming's noble phantoms were different from Wuming's noble phantoms when he was a servant. There was no level restriction. In other words, Wuming's noble phantoms were a special item called noble phantoms. It was much more powerful than the servant's noble phantoms. Because of this, Wuming would pick up the daily meditation that he abandoned when he was using the servant's body. Well, actually, Wuming's injuries hadn't healed yet. He was also recuperating. After a while, Wuming took a deep breath, and a turbid gas was expelled from Wuming's body. Wuming opened his eyes and frowned as he looked at the gas that was about to dissipate. Wuming used magic to draw a symbol in the air. In an instant, flames ignited out of thin air and burned the turbid gas. After all, it was a magical gas that had been eroded by the power of the era. It was not good to leave it in the real world. Therefore, every time Wuming expelled such a gas, he would use the Lune magic to burn it out. I didn't expect the power of the era to be so terrifying. I can't imagine what kind of terrifying attack I would have suffered if I didn't adapt to time and space. Wuming couldn't help but think of everything he had done in the time and space tunnel before. But in retrospect, if Wuming didn't have the power of time and space, he wouldn't have entered the time and space tunnel. Wuming shook his head and stood up from the stone. He looked at the house that he had lived in for nearly 3 months. I'm really reluctant to part with it. What's there to be reluctant to part with? A girl came in from the gate. She had almost the same appearance as Jean d'Arc, but Wuming found that this was not Jean d'Arc. It's nothing. Did school end so early today? Letitia. Yes, this girl who looked almost the same as Jean d'Arc was the French girl, Letitia, who was possessed by Jean d'Arc. After the end of the Holy Grail War, in order to facilitate the girl possessed by Jean d'Arc, Cals specially gave a private villa in France of Hugo Marinia to Wuming and Jean d'Arc. It provided for the two of them to live in these 3 months. Letitia, on the other hand, would take leave from school every day and return to this villa. In this way, Jean d'Arc stayed in Letitia's body during the day, enjoying the fun of being a student, and returned to the villa at night to live with Wuming. Of course, they slept in separate rooms. After all, the two were still friends and not lovers. Wuming, on the other hand, had a very comfortable recovery for 3 months. He quietly lived the life of an ordinary person, and recovered from the damage caused by the era. Because Letitia usually didn't come back at this time. But after this time, Wuming asked Letitia, who came back early, after finishing his daily meditation. The Holy Virgin wanted to come back to spend these last days with you, so I came back early to give you more time to get together. Letitia smiled sweetly and explained to Wuming. Speaking of which, time really flies. 3 months have passed in the blink of an eye. Wuming sighed. Then, with a flash of light, Letitia turned into Jean d'Arc. Speaking of which, even I, the ruler of the Holy Grail War, find it a bit unbelievable. The Great Holy Grail has disappeared. Does this mean that the Holy Grail War is over? Jean d'Arc and Wuming walked into the villa together. Jean d'Arc said. Wuming just smiled at Jean d'Arc's naive words. You also know that the Great Holy Grail is nothing more than a shortcut created by human magicians to reach the source of power. Even if it's gone, it can still be recreated. Besides, there are still great holy grails in other parallel worlds. Heroic spirits are mystical life forms that can transcend time and space. Even if this world no longer has a Holy Grail War, there will still be one in other worlds. We will appear again. Wuming also knew that Jean d'Arc was just simply looking forward to it. After all, Jean d'Arc also understood a lot of things after becoming a heroic spirit. Wuming continued. To put it bluntly, as long as there are creatures like humans, things like desire will not disappear. Really, Wuming, you are still so rough. not gentle at all. Jeanne d'Arc complained to Wuming. Then Jeanne d'Arc ran in front of Wuming, turned her head and looked at Wuming with a smile. Then let's enjoy these last moments, Cedric. After saying that, she walked to the kitchen and began to cook. Really? What can a village girl like you cook? Although he complained like this, Wuming was still looking forward to it. Chapter 97. The next day, the servants that the Magic Association was afraid of disappeared collectively on this day. After all, this kind of uncontrollable power was still very feared by some of the higher-ups of the Magic Association. Early in the morning, Wuming and Jeanne sat at the dining table, eating breakfast made by Letitia. Because Joan of Arc once messed up breakfast, Letitia had no choice but to make it. Jeanne looked at Wuming, who had been smiling, and said with a red face, "Really, I wasn't familiar with the kitchen at that time. It was an accident." However, Wuming said with a happy face, "Yes, yes." Later, breakfast ended with Wuming's happy and Jeanne's complaints. After breakfast, Wuming didn't meditate, and Jeanne didn't go to school. The two walked slowly on the road, looking at the scenery that they were already familiar with. After a while, Jeanne said, "Hey, Cedric, will we have a chance to meet again in the future?" Wuming didn't think and said directly, "Yes." "Huh? Why are you so sure?" Jeanne was surprised. "That's because you haven't replied to me yet. I'll keep waiting," Wuming said half-jokingly. "Really, you're not serious again?" Jeanne's cheeks were red and she quickened her pace. In fact, Wuming was also telling the truth. After all, Wuming was not dead. Although Jeanne was already in the Hall of Valhalla, it shouldn't be a problem for Wuming to summon a Valhalla, probably. Wuming quickly caught up with Jeanne, and began a different kind of last time. Finally, Wuming and Jeanne stood on a high ground, looking at the scenery in the distance. As if it was time, Jeanne turned and looked at Wuming. "Then I'll go first, Wuming." "Well, see you next time, Jeanne." In the end, Wuming told Jeanne his real name. Jeanne's body emitted a light, and as a gust of wind blew, the light dissipated. Letitia appeared on the spot and looked at her hands in disbelief. Then, Letitia looked at Wuming in embarrassment. That, Lord Hyenryong." Looking at the blushing Letitia, Wuming gently said, "Letitia, you've lived together for so long. Are you still afraid of strangers?" Letitia blushed even more after being exposed by Wuming. No, I. As expected, Cedric, you're still as wicked as ever." As she spoke, Letitia kissed Wuming's cheek under Wuming's shocked gaze. Then she quickly ran away. Wuming was at a loss as he watched Letitia run away. When he came back to his senses, he touched the cheek that was kissed and said helplessly, "This is really." Wuming sighed. Wuming guessed that when Letitia and Jeanne shared the same body, she often dreamed of Jeanne's dream, and gradually their feelings were assimilated. Then Wuming shook his head, opened his mouth, and chanted a spell. Wuming disappeared on the spot. A moment later, London, England, Clock Tower. Outside a room located at the highest point of the clock tower, a black-red ripple appeared. Wuming walked out. Wuming had a smile on his face. He wore a white robe, and his short blonde hair was overflowing with a holy aura. Wuming knocked on the door of the room. "Knock, knock. Come in." Wuming pushed the door open and entered. What he saw was a strong old man with red eyes, white hair, and a short white beard sitting in the dark room. "Oh, it's the virtuous dragon. Have the other servants returned to their seats?" Demonic Marshal Kitty Zelrich Subian Augustus asked. Wuming elegantly sat on the sofa, picked up the tea that had been prepared on the table, and took a sip. "Of course, I provided them with magic power and contract for only 3 months. Once the contract is broken, unless the servant's master is a true ancestor like you, it is impossible for them to continue to stay in the modern world." That's right, as the leader of the highest level of the Magic Association, the demonic path Marshal Keshua Zelrich Subian Augustus was a true ancestor. "Ha ha ha, that's all in the past. Who told me to lose to Zhuyu?" Zelik said with a laugh, not angry because of Wuming's words. "Zhuyu, everyone's Zhuyu Brunstad. She is the Moon King, equivalent to the moon's suppression power. Zhuyu was the first and strongest true ancestor in the world of the moon. So she was the origin of true ancestors and death apostles. Although Zelrich claimed that he had lost to the ancestor Zhuyu, the truth was that the two of them were tied. Zhuyu's body was destroyed by Zelik, but before Zhuyu's body was destroyed by Zelik, she turned Zelik into a death apostle. Thus, Kishia Zelik Augustus became one of the 27 death apostles. However, the Great Holy Grail did fall into your hands. Zelik narrowed his eyes and said with a smile. In response, Wuming laughed. That is the third method. Even I, who is called Hyenryong, can't help but want to study it. Yes, although the Great Holy Grail was taken away by Wuming to the origin, it was still under Wuming's protection, and had not been assimilated by the origin. Wuming wanted to use the power of the origin to analyze the third method, and then master this power. Wuming took another sip of tea, then looked at Zelik and asked, So, what do you want me to do, Kishia Zelik Augustus? During the hour of Wuming and Zelika's secret conversation, the two of them sparred in this narrow room. Zelik used a second spell, so the two of them did not destroy the room because of their sparring. Because neither of them used their full strength, Wuming barely won against Zelik by one move. As an old man who had lived for hundreds of years, the victory of the battle was not important. Zelik made a request in exchange for the right to bail out the Yugomarinia family. Of course, Wuming did not agree, but Zelik gave Wuming an auxiliary magic dress in exchange for a second spell, and after a moment of consideration, Wuming agreed. The premise was that it could not be something that was harmful to Wuming. Zelik said at that time, Even if I wanted to harm you, it is impossible. After all, you are the teacher of the ancient king, the descendant of Tiamat, the most mysterious dragon. But only Wuming himself knew that he was not strong enough to be compared to the creator of the Sumer pantheon, Tiamat. But after all, Zelik was the product of the second method in exchange, so Wuming had to think about it. After all, the 5 great spells of the shaped moon world were one of the most mysterious. As the second method was of the same origin as the third method, it would be of great help in analyzing the third method. Wuming asked Zelik to provide a magic dress with a powerful analysis ability. Zelik was a little puzzled. Even if it was a magic dress made by the second method, it should not be of much use to someone of Wuming's level. However, as a willful request of a partner, Zelik said that he had to add one more rule, which was that his request must be the first factor of action. Wuming said that as long as it was something he could do, he would try his best to do it as soon as possible. In this way, the two of them sat politely, drinking tea and chatting happily 3 months later. I want to invite you to a parallel world. Chapter 98. Parallel World. Wuming put down the teacup in his hand and looked at Zelik with an expressionless face. Yes, because a certain mysterious person in front of me has caused an even higher level of mystery to descend. My perception of other parallel worlds has become more sensitive. It's like a sixth sense that a world-destroying disaster will descend, and it's a disaster that will affect almost all parallel worlds. Zelik continued in a low voice. Unfortunately, I don't have the ability to stop the disaster from happening, and I can't even lock onto its source. But now, I know of your existence. Wuming sneered at this. As the second Archmage, even Zhuyu was dealt with by you. How can you not have a way to deal with this disaster that affects other parallel worlds? Wuming did not doubt Zelika's judgment that was similar to a sixth sense. For someone of his level, and a full-time second Archmage in a parallel world, Zelika's premonition could be said to be incomparably accurate. Zelik was not angered by Wuming's sarcasm. He smiled and said, Because I already know that I can't deal with this disaster by myself. Wuming thought for a moment and asked, Is it because you went to other parallel worlds to try to deal with this disaster, but you found that you couldn't do anything to solve it, Zelik? Zelik nodded and said, That's right. I solved many things that I thought were the source of the disaster, but I found that my perception of other parallel worlds was still on the verge of destruction. So, I came to find you. As an additional servant in this Holy Grail war, not only did you follow the Red Team's saber and summon her on your own, you also had many different identities throughout history. If it wasn't for the fact that I've talked to some heroic spirits before, I would even suspect that you were the one who played almost every role in history. Of course, Wuming also knew that Zelik was joking at the end, so he did not say anything about it. Most importantly, you seem to have said that you didn't die. Wuming poured himself another cup of tea, then asked, "So you think I can solve this crisis?" Zelik shook his head, then said, "Of course not, although I still don't know who solved this crisis. I can feel that that person has an unusual relationship with the heroic spirits." Zelik stood up and walked to a storage cabinet. "As for you, you're an extremely special heroic spirit. I'm sure you'll definitely have a connection with that person. Therefore, I'd like to invite you to a parallel world, to find that person who can resolve the disasters. At the same time, you can resolve the disasters that often occur in parallel worlds. After all, the fewer disasters in other parallel worlds have, the later the disaster that will affect other parallel worlds." Zelik took out a box and threw it to Wuming. Wuming almost guessed what it was, and immediately opened it. Then Zelik on the side said, "This is the magic dress you asked for. I specially made it in the shape of a crown. This should be very suitable for your caster profession." Wuming looked at the golden luxurious crown. It's called a crown, but it's more like a ring. However, Wuming doesn't care much about what this magic dress looks like, as long as it can be used. By the way, because I am afraid that you don't like its appearance, I deliberately set it as a magic dress that can automatically adjust its appearance. It is now in an inactive state. Moreover, I also set up an artificial elf for this magic dress. Of course, it is also in an inactive state. She will wake up at the moment you activate it and recognize you as the first master. Wuming was very surprised. He didn't expect Zelik to be so concerned about this magic dress. In fact, even without these factors, Wuming has a way to master this magic dress. It seems that you are very concerned about this matter, Zelik. Of course, Wuming and Zelik both knew that Wuming was talking about the disaster. Through the perfect production of the magic dress requested by Wuming, Wuming owed him a favor, and had to pay attention to this matter. After all, the matter of the Eugomarinia family, and the magic attire added together was enough for Wuming to owe them a favor. Later, Wuming said to Zelik, "Regardless of whether this magic dress is good or bad, I will do my best to fulfill your request and block my name Wuming." Wumi. Zelik pronounced the pronunciation of this word, as if thinking about the origin of this name or related things. "I'm sorry, my name is indeed Wuming, but that's Chinese. It's a stranger name for you." After all, Wuming was once picked up by the old people of the Celestial Dynasty. Even if Wuming was not human, this did not diminish the name that accompanied Wuming from the beginning. "So, when will you send me there?" Wuming interrupted Zelika's contemplation. Zelik immediately replied, "I've decided to send you to the parallel world now. What do you think?" Wuming stood up and put the crown in his hand into the open golden ripple. "Then let's begin." Zelik began to cast the second spell. Looking at the speed of casting, it seemed that he had already guessed that Wuming would agree and had been gathering magic power. Just as Wuming was about to be covered by the second spell, Wuming said, "By the way, remember to take care of the people I know in this world." "You're asking for a lot." Zelik, who was concentrating on casting the second spell, spoke up after a moment of silence. After all, this was transferring a high-ranked heroic spirit like Wuming, so Zelik had to be cautious. However, an accident still happened. The era had left a deep impact on Wuming. When he left this era, the era shifted to his destination. "Oh no." Zelik was shocked. "Wuming, remember to look for me in that world, he'll help you." Before Zelik could finish, Wuming vanished. Zelik, who had traveled to parallel worlds many times, knew that this was a normal phenomenon when traveling to other parallel worlds. Heaving a long sigh, Zelik returned to his original seat. In the face of a fate that humans cannot resist, what kind of miracle can he create? Zelik said as he took a sip of the freshly brewed tea, "I'm really looking forward to it." The clock tower detected that there were no abnormalities after the heroic spirits of the Holy Grail War disappeared. However, no one noticed that a different heroic spirit had left. The world returned to its peaceful state. On the other side, Wuming opened his eyes and saw a quiet forest. It was night now, and the forest was silent. It was so quiet that it was terrifying. That old man is really unreliable, Wuming complained and began his adventure in the new world. Or rather, he had embarked on the path to saving the world. Chapter 99. Wuming thought and walked in a random direction. After a while, Wuming saw a small town through the forest. As the name implied, the town was not large. It was the kind of town that could be seen at a glance. Moreover, Wuming also found a lot of magical power in the center of the town. Obviously there was a small spiritual vein. Although it was not a lot for Wuming, it was likely to be a gathering place for a human family. Enchantments. Wuming clearly sensed that there were multiple enchantments in this town. Interesting. Wuming kept smiling and walked toward the seemingly ordinary town. Just when Wuming just walked to the edge of the town, a huge magical power erupted. A large amount of black mud, starting from the center of the town, continued to rotate and expand, like a storm of death, slowly sweeping the town. Wuming sensed that the magicians in the town were basically dead in this storm of death. At the same time, the barrier was also broken. At that moment, a strange power covered Wuming. Wuming looked in a certain direction with some surprise. Contract. Wuming frowned, then began to move quickly in the air. Several Lune runes representing suppression appeared, and with a lot of magical power from Wuming, a large number of Lune runes instantly covered the storm of death. In an instant, the black mud was suppressed and formed a black sphere. Black hole. As the spell was chanted, a hole similar to a black hole in the universe appeared, instantly sucking the black mud sphere and crushing it. Black hole was a new skill that Wuming learned from the uninscribed book when he left Nasarek. Because the uninscribed book was a magic book in Yggdrasil world tree. Although it was spread to the other world where Nazarek's underground tomb was located at that time, it also included Yggdrasil world tree magic. No, it should be said that the magic of that other world and Yggdrasil's magic were the same system, so they could be used together. After all, the magic of Yggdrasil world tree could be casually displayed. Wuming preferred to use the magic of Yggdrasil world tree, or rather magic. But Lune magic had an extraordinary effect at certain times, just like the Lune rune combination used to suppress the black mud. Although Yggdrasil's magic was convenient, it was a game after all. Although there was the concept of seal, there was relatively little about this kind of magic. Moreover, this kind of seal represented invincibility and couldn't be attacked in the game. Wuming's purpose was to destroy the black mud. Naturally, it was impossible to use Yggdrasil's seal skill. That was also the drawback of Yggdrasil's transformation into reality. Seeing that the people who fled in panic had settled down, Wuming used rune magic to cast a diversion magic that could make pedestrians ignore his line of sight. Then, when the police set up obstacles to block him, he walked into the inverted semicircular hole destroyed by the black mud. Because Wuming was just contracted by someone. Moreover, Wuming felt the essence of the mysterious power, which was the wish-granting machine in the hand of his main body, the Holy Grail. After passing through a forest, Wuming saw a broken cabin on the edge of the big hole. There was also a little girl of 5 or 6 years old in the cabin. Wuming frowned a little. First, because his master was such a young child. Although he didn't know why he was contracted, it was too cruel to let such a young child participate in the Holy Grail War. Second, because Wuming saw that the little girl didn't have a smile on her face. No, it should be expressionless, like a puppet. I hope she's not a sacrifice of some magician family, Wuming thought to himself. At that moment, half of the cabin had been destroyed. Even if Wuming's clairvoyant skill was useless, Wuming knew that the cabin could collapse in an instant. At that moment, a little boy who looked to be about 11 or 12 years old ran over from the forest, but the little boy's mind seemed to be still immersed in the big hole in front of him that had a large piece dug out. Perhaps it was because of Wuming, the guy in strange clothes. The little boy quickly looked at Wuming. Gotcha. However, at that moment, the cabin seemed to have reached its limit. With a gotcha, it began to collapse. The little boy also saw the little girl in the cabin, but because he was focused on Wuming just now, the little boy didn't react in time. At that moment, the cabin had begun to collapse. Danger! The little boy yelled and ran to the cabin. But the little boy's speed was still too slow, and there was no time for him to run over. High-order transmission. At that moment, with a spell, Wuming instantly appeared beside the little girl. The little girl seemed to have just reacted. She tilted her head and unconsciously opened her mouth as she stared blankly at Wuming. Wuming instantly picked up the little girl, chanted the spell again and appeared in the same place. At that moment, the cabin completely collapsed, and the little boy who was running to the cabin also stopped. Is this magic? The little boy said with some surprise. Wuming glanced at the little boy with a smile, then smiled at the little girl in his arms and said, "Are you okay, master?" The little girl looked at Wuming with some doubts. She didn't seem to understand the word master. Then she shook her head and said, "Other than my mother, this is the first time someone hugged me." Wuming smiled. Even if the little girl was a victim of the magician family, she was a pure child who was not contaminated by the magician. "So how about this hug?" Wuming asked the little girl with a gentle smile. The little girl grabbed Wuming's clothes, rubbed it, and said after a while, "It's very warm." Wuming's smile was even brighter, touched the little girl's head, and said, "So how about sleeping for a while?" Wuming began to release his sacred aura. The little girl looked at Wuming, nodded her head, lay in Wuming's arms, and began to sleep. From the perspective of the little boy next to him, the big brother in front of him was exuding a faint golden halo, and the little boy was also affected by this halo. At this moment he felt sleepy. Wuming's caster-level skill, Sacred Aura A, was not simply the ability to bewitch people, he also had this similar effect to warm the atmosphere, make people sleepy, act as a heat source, dispel evil, repair, and other similar effects. At this moment, Wuming was using the warm effect to make people sleepy, and the golden halo was because Wuming didn't deliberately hide it. After all, the little boy in front of him knew magic, and he also saw a series of miraculous actions, so there was no need to hide it at all. For the sake of the little boy who knew how to help others, Wuming had a good impression of him. At this moment, an uncle who was about 30 years old rushed to the little boy at an unimaginable speed, grabbed him, and then began to retreat at a speed that ordinary people couldn't reach. However, that was a speed that ordinary people couldn't reach. It was simply a joke for a servant, a heroic spirit's clone. In prison, Wuming used a very common restriction magic in Yggdrasil. He easily froze the uncle's body. "Then can you explain to me what's going on? This is Mr. Magician." Chapter 100. The man in his 30s in front of Wuming swallowed his saliva and broke out in cold sweat. He understood what the creature in front of him was, and he also understood how destructive and unpredictable the creature in front of him was. Not to mention whether his origin bomb could affect it, but if it didn't, it would be troublesome. His own life was not important. What was important was the child in his hand, his adopted son. If something happened to him, he would not forgive himself. "So, sir, can you tell me where you are going with this child? I won't allow anyone to kidnap a child in front of me." Wuming said gently. Wait, Kiritsugu is not a bad person." The little boy who was grabbed by Chiesi, who was already immobilized, said weakly. No matter what, the little boy also knew the existence of magic. For the situation that happened at this moment, the little boy was not very worried. After hearing the little boy's words, Wuming instantly understood. The man who was immobilized by him should be with the little boy. The man should know the identity of Wuming, or the creature called servant. "I see, then how many Holy Grail Wars is it now?" Wuming said gently. "The 4th Holy Grail War, but it's over." The man looked at Wuming cautiously and suspiciously. Wuming also knew what he was wondering. The Holy Grail War was over, but his servant still existed, so he had to be cautious. "So that's how it is. I was too rash. I apologize to all of you here," Wuming said and lifted the immobilizing spell on the man. The man breathed a sigh of relief, then looked at Wuming and the little girl in his arms, and then took the little boy to the remaining house near the big hole. It seemed that he wanted to collect information. Wuming didn't care about the impolite man. Wuming pointed on the ground, and a simple house appeared there. Because Wuming had the power provided by Yggdrasil Baba, he could slightly control the wood element. The main purpose of building this house was to give his little master a place to rest for a short time. Wuming took out a piece of cloth and put it on the wooden bed as a sheet. Then he settled his little master, took out another piece of cloth, and covered her body. Then Wuming snapped his fingers, and a warm atmosphere filled the room. Wuming looked at the cup-shaped seal in his little master's hand and sighed. Wuming almost guessed that his little master's family probably died in this disaster. When Wuming came to the big hole, he released his magical power. After exploring, except for his little master and the father and son, there were no other humanoid life forms nearby. Wuming left the room and gently closed the door. Then Wuming gently jumped on the roof and sat down. Wuming knew that the father and son just now would definitely come to him again. Wuming didn't believe that the magician would come to this town that just suffered a disaster. In this way, Wuming began to meditate. On the other side, Amiya Kiritsugu and Shiro Amiya, the father and son Wuming met just now. At this moment, they were investigating the magician's family. I see, this is the godchild, the Shitsuki family's secret. The uncle Amiya Kiritsugu looked at the ancient document in his hand with slight excitement. It was written that the Shitsuki family's girl was a natural holy grail after birth, able to fulfill wishes without any cost. This power would only disappear when the girl grew to the age of 7. This kind of girl was called the godchild. Godchild would subconsciously fulfill the wishes of the people around her. In order to not let the children of the Shitsuki family be overwhelmed by these wishes, every time a girl of the Shitsuki family was born, the Shitsuki family would set up a barrier for the godchild. In the barrier, no one except the mother could enter. Godchild would stay in the barrier until she was 7 years old. After that, the godchild's power would disappear. Only then would she be allowed to come out of the barrier. In this case, the girl would explain the disappearance of 7 years on the grounds of treating a disease, or being adopted by a relative. Kiritsugu, it says here, this generation's godchild. If the wish machine wants to fulfill the wish of saving the world, her soul will be imprisoned by the world forever. Shiro Amiya was a little surprised. After all, the soul would be imprisoned by the world forever. He really couldn't imagine how painful it would be. Ah yes. Amiya Kiritsugu held his head and said, we know the way to save the world, but we didn't use the godchild's method, and we couldn't even find the godchild. Shiro Amiya looked at Amiya Kiritsugu with some surprise, as if wondering why he could say such a thing. Yes. Amiya Kiritsugu raised his head and looked at Shiro Amiya as if he had found a target. Shiro, the little girl next to the servant, must be the godchild. Shiro Amiya was puzzled. Kiritsugu, what do you mean? Find it, negotiate with it, and first find out what its real name is. Amiya Kiritsugu stood up and walked out of the room. Shiro Amiya also put down the book and quickly ran out. Remember, Shiro, the servant is a degraded version of the heroic spirit. Every heroic spirit was once a hero. The so-called hero is the kind of guy who has no feelings of ordinary people. They are all tools of heroic beliefs. Except for the command curse, nothing can control them. Kiritsugu looked at the wooden house that appeared out of thin air, and continued to say to Shiro Amiya, from the series of actions just now, it can be seen that he is the kind of servant with the order attribute who will not kill for no reason. Generally, as long as you don't touch their taboo, you will be fine. Shiro Amiya looked at Amiya Kiritsugu, looked at his somewhat scary eyes and nodded. Wuming opened his eyes and looked at the father and son who came to this side and smiled. Then Wuming, Amiya Kiritsugu and Shiro Amiya exchanged names. Then, Wuming learned about the situation of his master from Amiya Kiritsugu. Oh godchild! Wuming thought. Amiya Kiritsugu and Shiro Amiya stood opposite Wuming. Yes, in order to protect the last orphan of the Shitsuki family, we want to protect her. Even if you are a servant and have been instilled with the knowledge of this era, you can't better protect her in human society. How about we cooperate? Amiya Kiritsugu looked at Wuming with a blank expression. Wuming laughed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh at you. For magicians, my master is a rare universal wishing machine. I really can't think of anyone who wants to protect her. Then, Wuming looked at Amiya Kuritsugu, who was still calm, and Shiro Amiya, who was looking at Amiya Kuritsugu with a worried face, and said, "Well, then I accept your protection. I hope you don't let me lose hope, Amiya Kuritsugu-san." Wuming stretched out his hand and expressed a happy cooperation. Happy working with you, Wumian. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.